Dinner was still steaming on the table when the Nolan family left their small home in Kenai, Alaska, a coastal town with a population of just over 7,000. That February night brought an Arctic storm that dumped more than 18 inches of snow, blanketing the entire Turnagain Pass. At 7:52 p.m., staff at the Arctic Sun Roadhouse still remembered Eric Nolan tightening his heavy coat as he stepped out, the yellow lights behind him fading in the cold wind. He returned home only to hastily gather a few items, put the two children in the back seat of the frost-covered blue Blazer, and drive off into the howling darkness outside. A neighbor recounted how the porch light flicked on one last time, illuminating Dana Nolan's purple scarf, flashing through the swirling snow, the only splash of color in the white expanse. What happened in the next 6 hours would haunt Alaska for nearly 2 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Winter in Alaska in 2001 was harsher than in previous years. Snow fell heavily for days on end. Strong winds reduced visibility on the roads connecting Kenai to the Sterling Highway. Low temperatures caused the road surfaces to ice over, forcing many vehicles to travel slowly or stop altogether. Darkness fell very early, and the outskirts of Kenai were shrouded in faint light from street lamps battered by the wind. In that context, Eric Nolan appeared at the Arctic Sun Roadhouse late in the evening. He sat at a table near the window, ordered no food, and only drank a half-finished cup of coffee. Those present noted that he sat still, moved little, and did not interact with anyone in the place. After a short time, a strange man approached Eric's table. This individual did not draw attention when entering the establishment, and no one knew where he had come from. The two exchanged words briefly, not long enough for anyone to clearly hear the content. There was no argument, no obvious signs of tension, just a quick conversation that led to Eric standing up almost immediately. He left the roadhouse through the main door, stepping out into the intensifying blizzard. After leaving the place, Eric drove home to Kenai. There, he asked his wife, Dana, and their 2 sons, Ryan and Liam, to prepare to leave immediately that night. There were no signs of prolonged preparation. The family packed quickly, put on warm clothes, and went outside. The family's dark blue Chevy Blazer, usually parked close to the porch, was started by Eric amid the howling wind. The vehicle left the driveway and headed onto the main road, toward the Sterling Highway, as the snowstorm intensified. This was the last time neighbors saw the Nolan family's vehicle leaving the area. Around 1:45 a.m., a payphone at a rest stop near Quartz Creek recorded a short call made by Eric. The call was brief and did not convey any clear message beyond the system logging the connection time. No witnesses reported seeing the family in that area after the call. From that point onward, the Nolan family did not appear at any service station, residential area, or stop along the route. No further communications were recorded from them throughout the night. By morning, relatives tried to contact Eric and Dana, but received no response. All calls went to no connection or were unanswered. Relatives decided to go to the Nolan home to check. Upon arrival, they found the house unoccupied, lights off, heating system running at a low level, doors locked from the outside, and no signs that the family had returned after leaving the night before. The family's vehicle was no longer in the garage, and no neighbors reported them returning in the middle of the night. The lack of contact continued for many hours, causing concern among relatives. After confirming that no one in the Nolan family had appeared at work, school, or any acquaintances' homes, relatives realized that this absence could no longer be considered a normal delay. They decided to contact the Alaska State Troopers to report the incident, and that morning became the official time the unusual disappearance of all 4 family members was recorded, without any explanation or specific traces. Upon receiving the call, Alaska State Troopers in the Kenai area immediately treated it as a missing persons case requiring urgent handling. The duty officer quickly updated the report time in the system and began creating an initial file based on the information provided by relatives. The first information collected included the identities of the 4 Nolan family members the last time they were seen, the blue Chevy Blazer leaving the driveway at night, and the short call from the Quartz Creek payphone at 1:45 a.m. Troopers asked relatives to describe in detail the condition of the house when they checked that morning, including the lights being off, doors locked from the outside, no signs of the family returning, and the state of items in the house not indicating preparation for a long trip. The team entered all identifying data into the system: ages, possible clothing worn, distinguishing features, and family photos if available. Vehicle information, make, color, license plate, was added to the list of vehicles to monitor on the road system. Next, troopers established timelines to verify, starting from the time Eric was seen at the Arctic Sun Roadhouse the previous evening, the time the vehicle left the driveway, and the time the payphone call was recorded. This data formed a preliminary time frame used to assess the family's range of movement from when they left home until contact was lost. After collecting information and cross-checking with relatives, troopers assigned initial tasks to the case team. One group was responsible for re-verifying the house condition to ensure no details related to the departure time were missed. Another group reviewed the routes connecting Kenai to Quartz Creek to determine the most logical path based on travel time. At the same time, troopers requested access to payphone activity records to confirm the exact duration and characteristics of the call. This data was used to determine the last verifiable time of the Nolan family's presence. The records team also asked relatives for more information about each family member's daily habits to assess whether leaving home at night aligned with any previous familiar behavior. There were no indications they had ever planned to leave home at such a late hour, and relatives confirmed no one in the family mentioned any planned trip. Based on the initial data, troopers completed the official file creation, classifying the case as missing under unusual circumstances. Next, the internal system was updated to synchronize information for units that might join the search. A task list was established: recheck the house, review possible routes, check parking areas and traffic cameras if any, and verify the strange man who appeared with Eric at the roadhouse based on initial information from relatives. At this point, troopers had not conducted in-depth assessments or proposed hypotheses. They only recorded organized data and assigned tasks according to procedure. To ensure no important data was missed, they also requested verification of the list of incoming and outgoing calls from the Nolan home phone before contact was lost. Another team was tasked with initial contact with evening shift staff at the roadhouse to obtain preliminary confirmation of the time Eric left. These steps remained within the scope of basic information gathering, without deploying investigative or field search activities. After completing the basic information intake, the investigation team moved to establishing an initial timeline to determine the final sequence of events related to the Nolan family before their disappearance. The work began by collecting additional statements from relatives, the family's neighbors, and anyone who might have observed Eric, Dana, or the two children from the afternoon until the Chevy Blazer left the driveway. Relatives provided the time they last met the family before losing contact, while confirming that no one in the family reported any plans to leave home the previous evening. Neighbors were asked about the time they saw the Blazer leave the area. Many noted the vehicle lights turning on as the blizzard strengthened, indicating the departure time was later than usual for the Nolan family. Some also confirmed no signs of preparation for a long trip, as the family typically left during the day if traveling far. Based on these statements, the investigation team confirmed the first marker, the time the Blazer left the driveway. This time became the starting point of the timeline because it marked the moment the entire family left their residence without a clear plan. The second marker was established based on information about Eric's appearance at the Arctic Sun Roadhouse the previous evening. Evening shift staff and some patrons confirmed the time Eric arrived and left. Consistent with data from relatives, the investigation team added this marker to the timeline as a verification point of Eric's presence at a public location before returning home. This event also determined the time gap between Eric leaving the roadhouse and returning to the Nolan home to take the family away. From there, the time interval between the two markers was calculated to assess part of the journey and reasonable speed in the bad weather that night. The third marker, the last time the family's presence could be confirmed, was established through data from the Quartz Creek payphone. The call at 1:45 a.m., made by Eric, became the endpoint of the timeline, as no further records existed of the family appearing anywhere after that. The investigation team viewed this as the most important time marker because it helped determine the road segment the blazer had traveled from Kenai to Quartz Creek, while revealing the family's range of activity in the late hours. With 3 clearly defined time markers, the investigation team began building the possible travel range for the Nolan family based on the shortest and most suitable route between the locations. The distance from the roadhouse to home was cross-checked with the previous night's weather conditions to determine Eric's reasonable speed. Similarly, the distance from the Nolan home to Quartz Creek was calculated to clarify when the family likely left home and in which direction they traveled before making the call. The investigation team mapped the blazer's possible route using the 3 markers, starting from the driveway, appearance at the roadhouse, and the recorded call at the payphone. The road segments connecting these 3 points were marked to identify areas the Nolan family might have passed through from the previous evening to early morning. This mapping helped the investigation team determine the spatial range for further checks, including major roads, side roads leading into the forest, and areas where the family might have stopped briefly. The investigation team noted that the night's weather significantly affected speed and visibility range, so they incorporated weather factors into the travel model to identify intervals that might have been extended compared to normal road conditions. Cross-checking statements was also done at this stage to ensure sources did not contradict each other. Statements from relatives, neighbors, and roadhouse staff were reviewed in chronological order to eliminate possibilities of errors in timing or event identification. All blank intervals between the 3 main markers were marked as unverified, serving to prioritize areas the family might have passed through. Upon completing the timeline based on the Nolan family's final 3 time markers, the investigation team moved to a full examination of their home to determine the state of daily life before departure and check for any unusual signs at the residence. The examination was conducted that same morning after foundational information had been collected and the timeline confirmed. The Nolan family home was on the edge of the Kenai residential area, with a wide front yard and a long driveway to the garage. Upon arrival, troopers noted the front door locked from the outside, windows closed tight, curtains drawn in some rooms, and no signs anyone had returned since neighbors saw the blazer leave the driveway at night. Initially, they checked the exterior structure, including the front door, back door, garage door, and first-floor windows. There were no signs of forced entry, no damage or foreign objects around entry areas. The snow on the porch recorded some footprints consistent with the family walking to the vehicle when leaving, but new snow had covered most old traces, making detailed identification impossible. After confirming the exterior showed no signs of intrusion or struggle, troopers unlocked and entered to check the interior. The ground floor living room was noted in a state of interrupted daily life, a cold teacup on the coffee table, some children's toys in the corner, and the living room lights completely off. These details indicated the family was home before leaving at night, but showed no signs of extended preparation or prior planning. The kitchen area was checked next. Troopers noted the sink had a few unwashed dishes, the stove off, no pots or pans in use. The refrigerator was closed. Food inside arranged normally. No signs of gathering provisions for a long trip. The dining table was empty, not indicating the family had eaten just before leaving. These observations were entered into the report to assess the final daily activity time in the home. In the children's bedroom, troopers noted beds neatly made as if used but not disturbed, blankets and pillows without signs of being yanked or piled, toys left in mid-use positions but not scattered. The master bedroom of Eric and Dana was in a similar state. Bed used but not messy, closet closed, no signs of taking large amounts of clothing for long-term departure. Window light in the bedroom was blocked by curtains drawn from the previous evening, consistent with the family leaving at night. Troopers continued checking the back entrance, with a door to the backyard, and a side path to the driveway. The back door was locked normally, no signs of tampering. Along the path to the backyard, no foreign objects, no scratches or rubs on walls. This indicated the family did not use the back exit, reinforcing that they left through the front door and got into the vehicle at the driveway. The garage was also on the checklist. Inside, no blazer, confirming neighbors' statements of the vehicle leaving. Some car repair tools, storage boxes, and household items were arranged as usual. No signs of disturbance or unusual missing items. Shelves remained intact. No indications anyone took items for a special purpose before leaving. Troopers then checked the basement area. The basement mainly held household goods, old items, and storage boxes. Nothing unusual, no signs of hurried movement. Basement temperature stable with the overall heating system, indicating no activity near the time of departure. After checking all rooms, troopers summarized observations. The house showed no signs of break-in, no struggle marks, no hurried movement of objects. All rooms were in a state consistent with normal family life before leaving. No signs of preparation for a long trip. No packed bags, suitcases, or gathered food. This indicated the family left quickly without long-term plans, but also no signs of coercion occurring inside the home. Troopers noted the heating system maintained at medium level, consistent with leaving for a short time without intending to fully shut off equipment. Electric and water meters showed no unusual fluctuations since the previous night. All details were entered into the report to clearly determine the departure context and final daily activity time frame. After completing the documentation of the house's condition and determining there were no signs of a struggle or break-in, the investigation team moved on to verifying information related to the time Eric appeared at the Arctic Sun Roadhouse on the evening before the family left the house. The goal of this step was to precisely determine the time he was at the bar, the time he left, and any individuals who may have interacted with him. Gathering information at the Roadhouse was considered one of the key milestones in the timeline, as it was the last time Eric was seen in a public location before returning home. Upon arriving at the Arctic Sun Roadhouse, the troopers worked directly with the bar owner and the two servers on duty that evening. The owner provided data regarding opening hours, customer volume, and activities during the time frame when Eric was seen. According to the staff, Eric arrived at the bar as the weather began to worsen, when blizzard winds intensified and many potential customers decided not to come. One server recalled that Eric sat alone at a table near the window, did not order food, and only ordered a cup of coffee. The troopers asked the staff and owner to describe precisely the times Eric arrived and left the bar. According to their recollections, Eric appeared sometime from late afternoon into early evening and left the bar not long after a strange man approached his table. Although there were no surveillance cameras in the customer seating area, the owner provided the time Eric paid, which was recorded in the cash register system. This time was entered into the timeline for comparison with previously established markers. After verifying the times of arrival and departure from the bar, the troopers focused on gathering descriptions of the strange man Eric had spoken with. The servers stated that this man was not a regular customer. They described the individual as taller than Eric, wearing a dark-colored outdoor jacket, a knit cap, and short beard. This description was entered into the file for cross-referencing and subsequent checks. A few scattered customers in the bar at that time were also questioned, but most did not notice the strange man because the bar was empty and everyone was focused on leaving early due to the bad weather. The owner confirmed that the man did not order any food or drink and only stood near Eric's table, exchanging words briefly before leaving the bar first. No one clearly remembered the direction this person took after leaving the roadhouse. Next, the troopers examined the parking lot in front of the roadhouse to determine how many vehicles were present during the time frame when Eric arrived and left. At that time, the parking lot had no surveillance cameras, so the investigation team had to rely on staff statements and the bar's manual records estimating the number of vehicles when bad weather reduced customer turnout. The staff reported that only a few vehicles were in the lot throughout the evening shift, including Eric's Blazer. They remembered seeing a silver pickup parked near the outer edge, but were unsure who it belonged to. This information aligned with the description of the strange man in dark clothing, as some witnesses believed the individual left the bar heading toward this pickup. The troopers noted the vehicle type, color, and relative parking position in the lot. Although they could not determine the license plate or other identifying details, verifying the presence of the pickup added an important element related to the time Eric was at the bar. Afterward, the troopers checked for remaining tire tracks in the parking lot, but most had been covered by new snow and could not be used for comparison or vehicle confirmation. Information from the owner about the times vehicles left the lot was also noted, but no one could precisely determine the order of departures due to blizzard conditions, limiting visibility. The investigation team compiled the data collected at the roadhouse into a separate report to incorporate into the timeline: the time Eric was inside the bar, the time the strange man appeared and left, the time Eric left the bar, and the presence of the silver pickup. This data helped solidify the second marker in the timeline, providing a clearer picture of Eric's movements immediately before he returned home and took the entire family out of Kenai that night. Clarifying the activities at the roadhouse allowed the troopers to refine the chain of events leading up to the family's disappearance, while more accurately identifying the people and vehicles around Eric in the final hours before the Quartz Creek call was recorded. Once they had finished gathering information at the Arctic Sun Roadhouse and clearly established the time Eric left the bar, along with the presence of the strange man, the investigation team immediately moved to examining the payphone location in the Quartz Creek area, where the system had recorded Eric's final call at 1:45 a.m. Verifying details at the payphone was seen as the next critical step because it was the last trace confirming the presence of any Nolan family member. The troopers arrived at the Quartz Creek area late in the morning, where there was a small rest stop along the main route. The payphone was installed next to a public restroom with a simple metal roof overhang and a concrete base below. The telecommunications system provided call data, including the connection start time and end time. There was no information on the content since payphones do not record audio, but the duration indicated it was an extremely short call. The troopers cross-referenced Eric's time at the roadhouse, the time he left the bar, and the distance from the Nolan home to Quartz Creek to assess the reasonableness of the call time. Based on icy road conditions and average travel speeds during a nighttime blizzard, the distance from Kenai to the Quartz Creek rest stop indicated the family's trip took longer than usual, but the call time was still consistent with them leaving home late at night after Eric returned from the roadhouse. The investigation team recalculated the distance and travel speed from the Nolan driveway to the payphone location to determine if the blazer could have reached the area at the exact time recorded by the system. According to calculations using terrain data, road conditions, and snowfall levels, the 1:45 a.m. time was entirely feasible if they left home late at night and traveled continuously toward the route leading to Quartz Creek. The troopers examined the area around the payphone for any traces that could support confirmation of the family's presence. However, the snow surface there had been covered by a thick layer of new snow from early morning, erasing any footprints or tire tracks that might have existed from the previous night. Efforts to check areas a few meters from the payphone also yielded no clear results because strong winds and blowing snow had distorted the surface. The troopers noted that the snowfall intensity during the night and early morning made trace analysis impossible. Although no footprints or tire marks were found, they checked the overall condition of the payphone area to confirm if there were any signs of damage, loss, or items left behind. No items belonging to the Nolan family were found, and the payphone was functioning normally with no signs of tampering. The troopers also checked the entrance road to the rest stop to determine if there were any obstructions that might have forced the family's vehicle to stop unexpectedly, but the road surface, though slippery, had no obstacles or signs of an accident. The lack of physical traces did not negate the possibility that the family had been there, as the call data was direct evidence of Eric's presence at that time. After documenting the entire condition of the area, the troopers recompared the time interval from when Eric left the roadhouse to when he made the call. Although there was no absolutely precise data on when he left the bar, the statements and cash register records showed the time gap was consistent with Eric returning home, taking the family, and traveling to Quartz Creek. These factors were incorporated into the overall timeline to eliminate unreasonable time gaps. Next, the troopers cross-referenced possible routes leading to Quartz Creek. The main route from Kenai to the rest stop was the most logical travel path in bad weather conditions. Some side routes might have been blocked by snow or ice, so the family choosing the main route was highly likely. The investigation team marked potential road segments but did not deploy searches at this point, only noting them for reconstructing the journey. Finally, the troopers confirmed that the Quartz Creek marker was the last point directly verifiable through system data. The absence of physical traces in the area did not create conflicts in the timeline, as weather conditions prevented traces from preserving until morning. The payphone information was considered a key data point in determining the Nolan family's journey on the night of disappearance, helping the investigation team solidify three main markers in the timeline and define a reasonable travel range from leaving home to when the call was made. After completing the examination of the Quartz Creek payphone area and verifying the final call time from Eric, the investigation team moved to the first ground search deployment along the Sterling Highway to identify any traces the Nolan family might have left while traveling from Kenai to the Quartz Creek area. The objective of this search wave was to scan key road segments, assess areas where the family might have stopped or encountered obstacles, and determine if any evidence appeared along the route. In the morning, the troopers mobilized search forces consisting of multiple small teams, each responsible for a specific road segment stretching from the Kenai entrance to intersections near Quartz Creek. Due to the weather conditions from the previous night and new snowfalls this morning, the road surface was completely covered in white, requiring the search to rely on careful grid pattern scanning rather than expecting clear traces. The teams deployed from both ends of the route, one team starting from Kenai, the other from the opposite direction near Quartz Creek. Each team moved parallel along both shoulders, noting any unusual signs on the snow surface or along drainage ditches on either side. The coordination unit established a grid search system, dividing the route into short segments and assigning teams to scan in a zigzag pattern to ensure no area was missed. During the search, they focused on off-road shoulder areas, snowdrift slopes, and positions that could cause skidding or loss of control. Some curved road sections with limited visibility were marked as priority areas due to the potential for situations forcing a vehicle to stop suddenly. The search forces used basic tools to examine the snow surface, including depth probes, high-powered daytime flashlights to illuminate snow patches with unusual color or texture, and cameras to document every finding. Whenever a detail required verification, the search team paused to document and GPS locate it before moving to the next area. Another team moved slowly in specialized vehicles, checking road edges where snow was compacted or showed signs of disturbance, as these factors could indicate recent vehicle presence, even though snow had covered most traces. As they approached a road section not far from a side turn leading into the forest, the team near Kenai noted an area of compacted snow with irregular shape. After detailed measurement, they confirmed it could be partially covered tire tracks from wind and snow. The team immediately marked the area and reported to coordination to assign additional personnel for thorough examination. The specialized team analyzed the shape of the compacted snow region, groove depth, and surface size to determine compatibility with a vehicle. Although most grooves were obscured by new snow, remaining points showed width consistent with tire sizes on mid-size SUVs, like the Nolan family's Chevy Blazer. The findings were not sufficient to confirm these were the family's tire tracks, but the compatibility in width and snow compression direction made this discovery marked as the first valuable evidence within the ground search scope. Beyond this trace, the search teams continued scanning nearby areas for a second tire track or other stopping signs, but no additional useful data was found due to the new snow layer completely distorting the surface. The investigation team recorded the coordinates of the first tire track discovery in the file for journey evaluation. They continued expanding the search into the sparse forest adjacent to that area, in case the vehicle had turned off the main road, but the snow surface there showed no clear movement signs sufficient for verification. Meanwhile, the team starting from the opposite direction checked several roadside pullouts but found no footprints, items, or direct evidence related to the Nolan family. Both teams noted that the new snow layer had erased most potential traces from the previous night, making physical data difficult to determine, but the discovery of the compacted track in the mentioned position at least indicated the possibility that a similarly sized vehicle had passed through the area within the timeline frame. With the grid search system, all road segments the Nolan family likely traveled were scanned in the first ground search wave, with every unusual sign documented and cross-referenced with time and location data. When this search concluded with the first discovery being a tire track compatible with the Blazer model near a turn leading into the forest, the investigation team recognized the need to expand observation beyond ground team access capabilities. Immediately afterward, they shifted to deploying a helicopter search to scan areas obscured by steep terrain, thick snow, or limited visibility. The task was assigned to a Coast Guard unit experienced in search operations over snow-covered terrain, with stable movement capability in strong winds and rapidly changing visibility. The helicopter was mobilized from the nearest base in the morning when weather showed signs of temporary stabilization despite persistent low clouds and gusty winds. The objective of the aerial scan was to observe the entire area along the Sterling Highway, especially points with steep terrain, ravines, sparse forest regions, and places likely to conceal traces or cause a vehicle to veer off course. The flight crew used long-range observation equipment and optical binoculars to assist in identifying unusual points on the snow. As the helicopter approached the area where the ground search team discovered the compatible tire track, the crew lowered altitude to scan the entire surrounding space for additional signs related to vehicle activity. However, thick snow cover prevented identifying further ground details. Nevertheless, aerial observation allowed clearer identification of snow grooves differing from surrounding areas, helping to delineate points potentially impacted by a vehicle or heavy object. Continuing deeper toward mountain ranges near Quartz Creek, the helicopter noted several unusual changes in snow structure. One area sloping toward a mountainside had a region of deeper snow subsidence compared to the rest, forming a large depression with uneven edges. This detail received particular attention because deep subsidence areas are often caused by heavy weight, such as a vehicle sliding off the road or moving off course, resulting in unusual force distribution on the snow surface. The flight crew marked the coordinates of the subsided snow region and circled back in an arc pattern to determine the affected area's scope. From above, they could not clearly determine the cause of such deep subsidence, but based on the area's width, it could be assessed as not natural snow accumulation, as the concave shape had symmetry and significant depth, suggesting impact from a substantial mass object. The helicopter moved along adjacent mountainsides to ensure no other abnormal accumulation points were missed. Natural snow areas typically have more uniform structure, while some recorded regions showed segmented snow distribution, forming elongated streaks down the slope, possibly from something sliding through. These areas were marked for coordination with ground teams if needed for verification. As the helicopter returned to lower areas near roadside pullouts, they observed sparse forested regions where ground visibility was limited. However, due to continuous new snowfall prior, any traces potentially existing from the night of the Nolan family's disappearance were completely obscured. The flight crew continued recording weather conditions at each coordinate to update the ground coordination unit, aiding evaluation of subsequent search feasibility in the area. Some forest access roads had thick drifted snow posing dangers to vehicles or pedestrians. At these segments, the helicopter maintained safe distance and used underbody-mounted cameras to photograph the ground in wide strips. These images would be analyzed after the helicopter returned to base to determine if snow regions had unusual characteristics not visible to the naked eye from above. While scanning the area east of Quartz Creek, the helicopter noted another snow depression point, smaller but still distinctly shaped compared to surrounding snow. This depression was near the base of a gentle slope, where terrain could cause an object to slide down and create a compacted snow region, so the flight crew marked an additional coordinate for later verification, but observed no further visual data from above. When the helicopter completed its sweep and compiled the points of snow settlement that could potentially be related, the investigation team deployed ground forces to the Cooper Landing area to continue expanding the search scope to the trail system and the sparse forest strips along the Sterling Highway. The objective of this sweep was to determine whether the Nolan family or the Blazer might have turned into one of the side roads, hunter trails, or lesser-used paths where the vehicle could have become stuck, slid off, or stopped out of sight from the main road. Upon arriving at Cooper Landing, the search forces divided into several small groups, each responsible for a different trail. They started from the turnoffs closest to the location where compatible tire tracks had been spotted, then gradually expanded the scope along the trails running through the forest. The terrain in the Cooper Landing area consists of sparse pine forest strips interspersed with narrow trails, mostly left by hunters or hikers, often completely covered by snow in winter. The first group entered a trail leading south, observing the snow cover on the ground for tire tracks, drag marks, or any surface signs that might indicate the recent presence of a vehicle or people. However, the thick, fresh snowfall had completely covered the trail surface, obscuring any signs that might have existed previously. The scattered, compacted snow patches on the trail were likely just animal tracks or natural snow settling. Another group entered a hunter's trail deeper into the forest edge. This area had many steep sections, dense vegetation, and low natural light, even during the day. They used flashlights and snow probes to assess the compaction and hardness of the surface for any anomalies. A few areas with slight snow settlement were marked, but they lacked clear characteristics to link them to a four-wheel vehicle. These marks could have been from hikers a few days before the snowstorm or from large animals, as the depth and shape were inconsistent. The third group approached a trail leading down to low ground near a small creek. The terrain here was flatter, with fine and thick snow, making the surface easier to observe. They discovered a faint drag mark on the snow several meters long, but it was not deep enough to match a tire rut. The shape of the drag mark was blurred and indeterminate. Since there were no signs of continuous directional movement, the search team noted it in the report, but could not conclude any connection. As they advanced deeper into the Cooper Landing forest, the search forces noted points of broken trees, low branches that had been touched, or signs of alteration in the vegetation layer. A few locations had fallen branches near the ground, but there were no indications they had been impacted by a vehicle or unusual activity. Most likely, these were natural damage from strong snow winds in the preceding days. The investigation team also checked unofficial pull-off spots, sometimes used by locals or hunters, but there were no signs of activity or vehicle stops near the time of the Nolan family's disappearance. Some spots had old trash partially covered by snow, with no value for the search. During the sweep, the search forces continued to assess wind direction, snow depth, and the potential for trace coverage over time. The prolonged snowstorm on the night of the disappearance made surface-based searching difficult, as snow had continuously compacted and recovered. At one area near the intersection of two trails, the search team discovered a cluster of deeply compacted snow shifted slightly to one side. Although it resembled the impact of a heavy object, the compaction was uneven and lacked continuous drag marks, so it could not be confirmed as related to the Blazer. The team recorded coordinates and photos, but concluded that, based on the snow conditions, no definitive value could be drawn. When checking steeper trails, the search forces paid special attention to sections where a vehicle could slide down if control was lost. However, the snow cover was too thick, and there were no separating marks indicating recent vehicle impact on the surface. Some trail sections had unusually high snowdrifts from wind, but these were natural phenomena in the area with no investigative value. The final group checked the sparse forest area east of Cooper Landing, where trees were more widely spaced and visibility was greater. They looked for points of sudden compression or settlement in the snow, but found no signs that could help determine the Nolan family's route. All areas swept in this search yielded no items, footprints, or direct evidence related to the family. Upon completing the sweep of all trails and forests in Cooper Landing, the troopers compiled the minor traces recorded, but none were clear enough to establish a connection to the family's disappearance. Most signs were distorted by snow, unusable for reconstructing vehicle or human movement on the night of the incident. Although no definitive data was found, sweeping the Cooper Landing area helped rule out the possibility that the Nolan family had turned into the main trails there and reinforced the assessment that any potential traces were completely obscured under the blizzard conditions. After completing the sweep of the trails and forests in Cooper Landing, without identifying any traces related to the Nolan family's route, the search forces moved to the lake and river areas, where the terrain was more open but also posed greater risks, especially in Alaska winter conditions with unevenly frozen water surfaces and cold winds that could alter the ice surface in just hours. The objective of this search phase was to sweep Skilak Lake and the branches leading into the Kenai River, as these were locations where a vehicle that lost control or slid off the road could fall without leaving easily detectable traces in heavy snowfall conditions. The search forces first moved to Skilak Lake, a large lake near the route the Nolan family might have taken if they left the Sterling Highway via a side turnoff or lost control on a curved section. Upon reaching the lake area, the troopers noted that ice covered the entire water surface with varying thickness by region. The search team divided the area into observation grids to check sequentially from the shore toward the lake center, focusing on points with color changes on the ice surface or areas with thinner snow accumulation, as these factors sometimes indicate underlying structural changes. They used ice augers and sonar equipment to determine if any unusual depressions or cracks appeared within the search range. At some points near the north shore, the forces noted slightly raised ice surfaces, but measurements showed no signs of ice breakage or recent heavy impact. These minor deformations were determined to be natural phenomena from temperature differences and strong winds during the blizzard night. Continuing to expand into the lake center, the search team focused on observing irregular ice streaks, but initial analysis showed these were just refrozen patches from prior mild thawing, with no shapes matching a four-wheel vehicle impact. There were no circular or elliptical ice breaks, which are typical if a vehicle plunges into a lake. The troopers also observed the ice near the lake outlet leading to the Kenai River, as this area could have subsurface currents weakening the ice, but at the time of the sweep, the ice surface remained solid with no extended cracks potentially related to an incident. After completing observations at Skilak Lake, the search forces moved to check the Kenai River, which has strong flow and frequently changing ice formations in winter. Along both riverbanks, the forces split into groups moving parallel to sweep natural access points where a vehicle could plunge if it slid or left the roadway. The teams noted thick but uneven river ice, formed from different cold spells. Darker areas under the ice were assessed but showed no cracks or unusual subsidence signs. At some curves near the shore, snow cover formed thick layers but lacked long slide marks or characteristic wheel compression in compacted snow. The search team continued checking steep surfaces from the road down to the river to see if any locations could cause a vehicle to plunge in a loss of control scenario. These points were thoroughly checked by measuring snow depth and determining if any unusual gaps existed between snow and underlying ice, but none showed vehicle impact signs. Another group entered low ground near the confluence of a Kenai River branch and the main road. This area was often built up by wind-blown snow, forming soft drifts that could conceal traces. However, close surface inspection revealed no deep depressions or uniform compression signs potentially related to a vehicle. The wind-gathered snow patches had loose structures, easily breaking when probed, proving they were newly formed rather than impacted by a heavy object. While approaching close to the riverbank, the forces also checked bushes that were bent or broken, as such signs sometimes indicate a large object passing through. However, most broken branches showed natural signs from snow weight and strong winds, with none indicating impact from heights or positions matching a vehicle front or undercarriage. While walking along a western riverbank section, the troopers discovered an irregularly concave snow accumulation area. But upon close inspection, they determined it was a patch of snow that had lightly collapsed due to underlying ice movement, not a sign of a vehicle or heavy object. Checks of intersections between the main road and riverbanks were also conducted to assess if any areas could cause a vehicle to veer off course. However, no sections showed slide ruts or strongly compacted snow surfaces, indicating a very low likelihood of the vehicle entering the river or lake at these points. After completing the sweep of the lake and river areas without finding any traces related to the Nolan family's route, the investigation team shifted to verifying information about a logging camp, an element mentioned by relatives when describing the last contact with Eric. Although the payphone call from Quartz Creek provided no content, the relatives' mention of Eric possibly discussing work or a meeting related to the logging industry led the troopers to treat this as an additional lead to check. The goal was to determine if any logging camps were operating in the area at the time of the Nolan family's disappearance, and whether those camps were hiring labor or had connections with people from outside the Kenai area. The investigation team began by contacting a list of active logging camps within a wide radius, including the Kenai Peninsula, Cooper Landing, Sterling Highway, and nearby areas with seasonal logging activity. This list was gathered from the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, private forest management companies, and operators of mobile logging camps. The troopers called each relevant unit to verify operations at the time of the disappearance, focusing on three main factors: camps open at that time, camp locations relative to the route the Nolan family might have taken, and temporary labor hiring in late winter 2001. Initial verification results showed that most logging camps were in a reduced activity phase due to poor road conditions and weather unfavorable for timber transport. Some camps were temporarily closed, maintaining only small oversight crews, while mobile camps farther north had relocated earlier in the month. No camps reported hiring additional labor or taking on new workers around the time of the Nolan family's disappearance. The troopers also inquired about the possibility of outsiders visiting camps to discuss work or recruitment contacts, but the units contacted confirmed no such cases. A few smaller camps outside communication coverage were visited in person by personnel, but results were similar. All lacked the pattern of accepting new labor during this period. To ensure nothing was missed, the investigation team continued sweeping old, inactive, or abandoned logging camps, as these sites were sometimes visited by locals or freelance workers. However, record checks and information verification showed most such locations were heavily snow-covered, with no signs of recent activity or habitation. Some mobile camps deeper in the forest, where ground was unstable in winter, were also confirmed to have no personnel during the relevant time. After verifying all information related to the logging camps in the area, and concluding that no logging camp was hiring or operating in a way that could be connected to the disappearance of the Nolan family, the investigation team shifted focus to screening the cabins along Johnson Pass and those scattered in the surrounding areas. These were small shelters, many privately owned, some public cabins used during the hiking, backpacking, or outdoor activity seasons, and others abandoned. The goal of this phase was to check whether the Nolan family or the Blazer had stopped near any cabin, or if a cabin had been used as a temporary shelter on the night of the disappearance. Johnson Pass is an area with diverse terrain featuring intersecting trails, many cabins located far from the main road and accessed via narrow paths through the forest. Due to thick snow and the difficult-to-reach locations of the cabins, the search teams were divided into multiple groups, each equipped with GPS devices, high-powered flashlights, and tools for clearing paths to move safely through the area. The first cabin checked was a public one, located a few hundred meters from the main road, commonly used by hikers in warmer months, but almost never visited in winter. Upon approaching, the troopers observed the surroundings for footprints, drag marks, or any impressions compressed under the snow, but the entire area was covered by a fresh layer of snow, with no shapes indicating anyone or any vehicle had approached in recent days. The cabin door was securely closed with no signs of forced entry. Inside, the team inspected the wooden floor, small stove, and sleeping area. All appeared unused for a long time. There were no personal items left behind, and no signs of people sheltering overnight. The second cabin was deeper in the forest, privately owned but rarely used in winter. The approach path was narrow and steep, requiring the search team to clear a way through deep snow. Upon arrival, they examined the area around the cabin and determined the snow cover was even and thick, with no unusual mounds or compressed areas suggesting approach the previous night. The door was locked from the outside with no damage. Some windows were snow-covered, but showed no signs of movement inside. After obtaining permission from the owner to enter, the troopers found the interior exactly as described by the owner. There were no unfamiliar items, no signs of recent activity such as fresh ashes, trash, moved furniture, or footprints on the wooden floor. The third cabin was an abandoned one in a low-lying spot near a small stream, known to some long-distance hikers but rarely used due to its deteriorated condition. Upon approach, the troopers noted strong winds had caused snow to pile high against one wall, but this showed no signs related to human activity. The cabin lacked a proper door, only a frame with an old wooden board leaned against it as temporary cover. Inside, the team found rotted wooden floors and scattered old items. There were no fresh footprints or drag marks on the lightly snow-covered floor surface. The cabin clearly had not been used recently. Other search teams continued deeper into Johnson Pass, where several additional small privately owned cabins were located. One cabin near a hunter's trail showed signs of recent approach, but upon close inspection, the troopers determined the tracks matched the boot descriptions of local hunters previously reported by residents. Inside, the stove contained cold ashes, but there were no items or signs related to the Nolan family. Further out, the search teams checked an old two-story locked wooden cabin. Outside, the snow was undisturbed. Upon entry, they noted dusty interiors with no footprints or recent movement marks. Furniture was covered in thick dust, indicating no use for an extended period. Throughout the screening process, the troopers focused on looking for signs of struggle, dried fluids, abandoned items, clothing, shoe prints, or any details suggesting a cabin had been used as temporary shelter. However, all checked cabins yielded similar results. No physical evidence, no signs of forced entry, no presence of vehicles or people during the relevant time frame. Cabins with fireplaces showed no fresh ashes, no lingering smoke or ember smell. Beds were undisturbed and unused. Cabin floors had no footprints matching the size or weight of small children. Additionally, areas around the cabins showed no blocked wind patterns or compressed snow trails resembling footsteps. Upon completing the inspection of the entire cabin system at Johnson Pass and surrounding areas, the troopers compiled the information and concluded there was no indication the Nolan family had stopped or appeared at any cabin in the area. Despite the scattered groupings and varied terrain positions of the cabins, none provided direct or indirect evidence to determine the Blazers' route or the presence of the four family members on the night they disappeared. After screening the entire cabin system in Johnson Pass and nearby areas without finding any signs related to the Nolan family's appearance, the investigation team shifted to assessing risks of accidents and snow burial along the route the Blazer might have traveled on the night of the disappearance. This work aimed to determine whether the vehicle could have encountered trouble on a dangerous section, slid off the road, or been completely covered by an avalanche without leaving obvious traces. The Sterling Highway and connecting roads in the area feature complex terrain with sharp curves, sudden descents, and strong wind zones, causing uneven snow accumulation. The troopers began by compiling a list of locations considered hazardous based on Alaska Department of Transportation reports and experience from prior accidents. These included curves in hilly terrain, small bridges prone to icing, and narrow sections along cliffs or streams. Search teams were assigned to each location for on-site inspection, At each point, they evaluated snow surface, road slope, snow buildup on guardrails, and any signs that might indicate a vehicle sliding or leaving the roadway. However, continuous fresh snowfall for hours had made the road surface uniform, with no long skid marks or disrupted snow characteristic of a fall or spin-out. Some areas with deeply compressed snow at road edges were probed thoroughly with snow probes to check for unusual voids or deep subsidence beneath. Results showed these snowpacks resulted from wind or natural fracturing of underlying ice layers, not vehicle impact. Lower sloped areas toward forests or stream banks, where a vehicle could plunge if control was lost, were examined next using tools to measure snow compression along both sides. These sections showed smooth, continuous snow surfaces with no cracks or arc-shaped skid marks, typical of vehicles leaving the road. At lower points where terrain leveled out, the troopers checked wind-drifted snow piles, as a fallen vehicle in low ground could be covered within hours. However, no snow areas showed compression deep enough to conceal an entire SUV. Search teams also screened areas prone to snowslides. Natural wind-driven slides sometimes created uneven surfaces, but no locations showed a large snowmass recently displaced by a heavy object. Snow depth was measured layer by layer to detect disruptions, but all layers indicated natural accumulation. One team inspected curving sections around rock faces, where winter accidents most commonly occur. If a vehicle slid off at these points, the snow or underlying rock often showed impact signs. However, field observations revealed no rolled rocks, pushed down snow, or broken brush in a falling direction. The slopes below these curves remained intact, with no dents or long grooves down to the bottom. Other teams evaluated icy surface sections, including small bridges over streams. Despite slippery bridge decks, guardrails showed no collision damage. Snow on outer railings was undisturbed, indicating no object had scraped them recently. Another area of focus was less traveled road sections where snow could be deeper due to lack of regular vehicle compression. The troopers examined entire road edges, searching for depressions matching tire width. They found a few scattered light sink areas, but depth and shape did not match sliding tire tracks. These were assessed as likely due to minor melting and collapse, unrelated to vehicle force. After checking all marked hazardous locations, the troopers compiled data and concluded there were no physical signs the blazer had fallen off the road, slid into the forest, or plunged into low terrain. Snow surfaces were uniform, with no grooves or areas disrupted in a vehicle impact pattern. This ruled out obvious accidents at the surveyed locations and indicated the Nolan family's journey did not end at any dangerous point along the main route within this search phase's scope. After completing the evaluation of dangerous road sections and concluding that there were no physical signs indicating that the Nolan family's vehicle had been involved in an accident or buried in snow at the surveyed locations, the investigation team shifted to processing the leads provided by the public in the early days of the search. The goal of this phase was to eliminate false or irrelevant information to avoid creating misguided investigative directions, while also reviewing reports of vehicles similar to the blazer to determine if any cases of mistaken identity had affected data collection. The troopers began by compiling all the information submitted by local residents through the tip line, many of which were speculative based on sightings of an SUV traveling in bad weather conditions on the night the Nolan family disappeared. However, most of these reports lacked details about license plates, identifying features, or exact times, making them unusable for directly determining the blazer's route. Some residents reported seeing a dark green vehicle at various locations along the Sterling Highway. The troopers cross-referenced the times they described with the established timeline, revealing that many reports did not match in terms of time or location. One report claimed the vehicle stopped at a small rest area near Cooper Landing, but when checking the only traffic camera near the adjacent area at that time, the troopers confirmed no vehicle matching the description was present. Another report mentioned seeing vehicle lights turning onto a hunter's trail, but search teams had thoroughly scoured the entire area and found no signs that a vehicle had ever been there. These inconsistent reports were marked as false leads and removed from the file. Several reports of loud noises on the night of the snowfall were also examined. Residents claimed to have heard sounds similar to a vehicle crashing or sliding, but when the troopers surveyed the area, they determined the sounds were most likely from snow falling off roofs or large tree branches, a common occurrence in bad weather. No physical evidence at the scene supported any hypothesis related to a vehicle. The investigation team also reviewed reports of vehicles similar to the Blazer in the area. Many households used the same type of SUV, making it difficult to distinguish based on color and shape descriptions alone. The troopers directly contacted several owners of similar vehicles to verify whether they had traveled through the area during the relevant time period. This verification helped rule out random coincidences that residents might have mistaken. After filtering, no reports indicated that residents had accurately seen the Nolan family's Blazer at a location that could support the established timeline. The remaining information was either too vague or confirmed to be unrelated. At the end of the phase to eliminate false leads, the troopers narrowed down the list of information to only those data points with actual value, ensuring that subsequent searches and analyses would not be influenced by misleading public tips. After completing the elimination of false leads from the public and verifying reports of similar vehicles, the investigation team entered the phase of compiling all results from the first search wave to assess the effectiveness of the activities conducted and determine whether any traces were valuable enough to open new investigative directions. The data was compiled from three main sources: ground searches along the Sterling Highway, helicopter scans of complex terrain areas, and checks of trail systems, cabins, lakes, and rivers in the region. When all the information was plotted on a comprehensive map, the troopers noted that all the collected data was merely suggestive, without any direct evidence related to the Nolan family's presence after the payphone call from Quartz Creek. The tire tracks compatible with the Blazer model found during the ground search were the only trace with potential relevance, but due to heavy snow cover and incomplete shapes, they only indicated the possibility that a similarly sized vehicle had passed through the area, not enough to confirm it was the family's vehicle. The two deep snow depressions recorded by helicopter could not be attributed to any cause, as there were no clear signs of a vehicle falling or strong external impact at those locations. The scanning of trails and the Cooper Landing Forest yielded no useful results. The minor traces noted there were all deemed unrelated or insufficient for analysis. No personal items, footprints, drag marks, or signs of human activity were found at any cabins. Similarly, the lake and river areas provided no evidence suggesting the vehicle had fallen into the water or that ice had been broken. The ice surface was uniform, with no cracks or depressions large enough to conceal an SUV in a short time. When compiled, the troopers confirmed that the entire initial search area, including the main road, sparse forests, cabins, lakes, and rivers, recorded no direct signs indicating that the Nolan family or the Blazer had stopped, encountered an issue, or deviated from the route in ways typical of accidents. Natural snow traces, sometimes resembling vehicle marks, were all determined to be caused by wind, temperature, or animal activity. This significantly reduced the ability to locate the next route based on remaining physical evidence. Based on the available data, the troopers began re-evaluating the search scope. If the Nolan family did not appear at any point in the vicinity of the last known markers, this raised the possibility that they were no longer within the initial search area or that the vehicle had left the region in an unrecorded direction. This situation was particularly complex due to Alaska's winter terrain, with thick snow in many areas, hard-to-spot turnoffs, and side roads that could be completely covered by snow in just a few hours. Additionally, there were no witness accounts or camera recordings to precisely determine the Blazer's direction after leaving the payphone, making the potential search area expandable in multiple directions. The troopers also considered the possibility that the vehicle had entered areas inaccessible by traditional search methods, such as deep forests or unmaintained winter side roads. However, without initial traces to guide the investigation, these hypotheses could not be verified. The conclusion of the compilation phase showed that all data from the first search wave was insufficient to open new investigative directions or confirm any specific route for the family after the Quartz Creek marker. There was no evidence of an accident, no signs of presence at cabins or trails, no footprints or items, and no reliable witness reports. This led to the assessment that the Nolan family may have left the search area in an undetermined direction, or that their journey was interrupted in a way that left no traces in the scanned region. At the end of the compilation, the troopers noted that the first search phase, despite covering a large area and using multiple methods, still did not provide strong enough leads to narrow or redirect the investigation at that time. After compiling all results from the first search wave and concluding that the collected data was insufficient to open new investigative directions, the investigation team decided to deploy one final expanded search to scan locations considered difficult to access or previously identified by helicopter as having unusual terrain features. The goal of this phase was to directly check ravines, steep slopes, snow-covered creeks, and suspicious snow depressions that the flight crew had noted from above during the previous search. This was a search scope requiring coordination between climbing teams, probe equipment units, and specialized ground forces for dangerous terrain. The first marked points were two deep snow depression areas near the eastern mountain slope along the route, where the helicopter observed differences in snow surface structure. The search teams used snow depth measuring equipment and safety ropes to access the area. Upon arrival, they examined the snow surface, observed compression levels and depression shapes, but found no signs indicating the snow had been impacted by a heavy object like a vehicle or people. Probing digs into the snow at several points also yielded no useful data. Beneath the snow was only natural ice base, with no breaks, cracks, or unusual voids. At another ravine near the helicopter-marked area, teams accessed the slope edge with support ropes. This was rugged terrain with uneven snow cover and prone to collapse. The troopers checked the slope walls for slide marks, long grooves, or traces of a vehicle sliding down, but the entire surface only showed natural snow slides after the storm, with no signs of a large object falling from the main road. The search teams also checked the ravine bottom to assess the possibility of an object buried under snow, but the snow surface was flat and uniform, with no unusually deep depressions or bulges. Some minor suspicious points appeared due to natural changes in ice and snow, but upon close inspection, the forces determined they were unrelated to a vehicle. As the search expanded westward, forces entered sparse forest sections with steep terrain and strong winds, where snow was blown into uneven patches, creating the appearance of external impact marks. However, depth measurements and surface structure observations all indicated these were natural snow accumulations, with no drag marks or grooves consistent with vehicle movement. Another search team was tasked with checking low areas near the mountain base, where vehicles could sometimes get stuck if sliding off the road. They scanned each area with metal detectors for signs of a buried vehicle, but all results were negative. There were no magnetic field changes or signals suggesting the presence of a large metal object under the thick snow. Additionally, bushes and vegetation in these locations showed no breaks in a direction consistent with a vehicle slide. The search forces also re-examined rarely used side roads with high slopes leading to small valleys. However, the snow cover was too thick, erasing any potential traces if they existed. The search team noted that no area exhibited physical signs of a vehicle sliding off the road or being buried in snow in a way that left characteristic surface structures. After systematically checking all suspicious points, the troopers conducted a final evaluation of the potential for new leads in the area. The results showed no reliable signs in the terrain indicating the Nolan family's presence or route after the Quartz Creek marker. The snow depressions observed from above were all determined to be natural phenomena or effects of strong winds, not vehicle impacts. Ravines, steep slopes, and valleys recorded no physical evidence, tire tracks, or unusual structures under the snow. With the completion of checks on all difficult-to-access points that search forces could safely reach under the weather conditions at the time, the investigation team proceeded to compile a summary report. In the report, the field forces recommended that no further priority areas remained within the initial search scope for continued scanning with any likelihood of results. All potential locations based on helicopter data, witness statements or terrain assessments had been checked without yielding new traces. Based on this conclusion, the troopers proposed closing the field search activities for the 2001 phase, marking the completion of the final expanded search scope under the limited weather and information conditions at that time. After completing the final expanded search and confirming that no new traces were discovered in the entire scanned area, the troopers held an overall evaluation meeting to decide whether to continue or suspend the search activities. Results from many days of deployment showed that all field approaches yielded no data capable of clarifying the Nolan family's final journey, and suspicious points from helicopters, cabins, trails, lakes, rivers, or ravines all concluded as unrelated. Winter weather conditions continued to worsen, making prolonged maintenance of search forces both increasingly risky for safety and unlikely to add value as new snow continuously covered any potential traces. With these factors, the troopers reached the official decision to end all field search activities related to the Nolan family disappearance. The decision was based on the assessment that all areas accessible by standard means and specialized teams had been systematically checked. No further priority locations existed that forces could access under current conditions with expectations of finding new signs. After ending the search activities, the case file was transferred to inactive status according to procedures for handling prolonged missing persons cases without new data. This status did not mean the case was fully closed, but reflected the reality that no further field activities or active investigations were ongoing. All reports, search maps, helicopter images, cabin logs, lake and river check results, and public tip verifications were archived for long-term preservation. The file was marked as reopenable if new evidence emerged or if future conditions allowed for more effective rescanning of the area. Transferring the file to inactive status marked the official end of the 2001 search phase, while highlighting the limitations of search operations in Alaska's winter terrain, where physical traces can completely vanish after just one night of heavy snow. After the case file was transitioned to inactive status, and all official field search activities concluded, troopers proceeded with a post-search technical evaluation to determine the extent to which natural conditions impacted the ability to collect traces and to objectively assess the reasons why no evidence related to the disappearance of the Nolan family could be found. Terrain and meteorology experts were brought in to analyze weather data from the night of the disappearance, as well as the progression of subsequent snowfalls. According to the meteorological report, the Kenai area and surrounding regions experienced a major blizzard with heavy snowfall and strong winds capable of blowing away or covering any traces within just a few hours. Based on simulations of snow movement under strong gusty winds, the experts concluded that if the Nolan family or their blazer had left any traces on the ground, those traces were most likely erased completely on the very first night, even before search teams were deployed. The time for snow coverage was estimated at just 2 to 4 hours after the storm reached its peak intensity, making any footprints, tire tracks, or surface disturbances virtually undetectable by the next morning. Additionally, the sharp drop in temperature that night led to the formation of a new snow layer over the old one, completely altering the surface structure. These conditions made it impossible to distinguish between traces left by humans and natural deformations. Terrain analysts also pointed out that many areas along roads, trails, and cabins were in wind funnel zones where snow could be pulled downward by cold air currents, creating false depressions similar to those caused by a sliding vehicle or heavy object impact. However, these areas typically had unstable shapes that continuously changed within the first few hours, rendering them unreliable as indicators. In the comprehensive report, experts emphasized that the absence of physical evidence was not unusual under the extreme winter climate conditions of Alaska. On the contrary, it was entirely consistent with what commonly occurs in cold season disappearances. where physical traces are erased before search teams can reach the scene. Beyond the snow factor, the lack of supporting data from traffic cameras, direct witnesses, or cell phone signals made it nearly impossible to accurately reconstruct the Nolan family's route. Troopers also reevaluated the collected timelines, including the time they left home, the time they appeared at the roadhouse, and the time of the call from Quartz Creek. Although these points indicated a certain journey, they did not provide enough data to determine the subsequent direction or the vehicle's location after the call. The lack of connection between these timeline points also rendered any expanded hypotheses baseless. The technical report concluded that the case lacked physical data, witnesses, and environmental traces to continue any further field analysis. Experts assessed the likelihood of collecting additional evidence under similar conditions as very low, since all useful traces had been erased in the initial hours. With these conclusions, troopers officially recorded the case as unable to proceed with investigation at that time, and all documents were archived to await any potential new information that might emerge in the future. After the post-search technical report confirmed that weather conditions had erased all useful traces within the first few hours, and the case lacked data to continue, the Nolan family file officially entered cold case status in 2002. During this phase, all documents related to the disappearance, including ground search reports, helicopter sweep data, cabin logs, trail maps, scene photographs, and witness statements, were systematized and digitized according to the new Alaska State Troopers procedures to ensure long-term accessibility, cross-referencing, and storage. The digitization process took several months due to the large volume of materials, which included both paper documents and physical photographs. Everything was entered into the state's cold case storage system, allowing future investigators to review the entire process seamlessly. Additionally, the file was categorized into data groups, timelines, environmental evidence, search activities, witness reports, and technical analyses. Each group was assigned separate access codes to facilitate periodic reviews. From 2002 to 2018, the Nolan case was considered one of the prominent unsolved disappearances in the Kenai Peninsula area, but no new information was recorded. Each year, the Cold Case Unit conducted periodic internal reviews to determine whether any new leads, witness reports, or data from similar cases required cross-referencing. However, throughout this period, no reports were substantial enough to reopen the file. Some scattered tips were received, mostly from locals claiming to have seen a similar blazer or possibly heard about an unusual family trip in 2001, but upon detailed verification of timelines, locations, and descriptions, all were deemed mismatched. Reports of vehicles falling into lakes or rivers in subsequent years were also examined. But these incidents involved different vehicles or were confirmed as unrelated accidents. Forest Patrol units during periodic wildfires also recorded any findings, but no signs or items matched the Nolan file. During the digitized system operation, some new investigators reviewed the file as part of training programs, but all reached the same conclusions as the 2001 investigation team: complete lack of physical traces, no direct witnesses, and no additional information from related sources. Cell tower data from 2001 was insufficient for route reconstruction, and cabins, trails, and forest lakes provided no evidence. In some years, the Cold Case Unit proactively contacted Nolan family relatives to check for any new information through personal channels, but relatives provided no data beyond what was initially recorded. They could only confirm that no family members had reappeared, and there had been no contact from the missing individuals. Additionally, Alaska State Troopers coordinated with agencies like the National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, and Coast Guard to review accident reports, sightings of unusual objects, or unidentified bodies, but none matched. Some animal bones or metal objects found during forest patrols were sent for testing or VIN checks as a precaution, but all were non-matches. By the mid-cold case period, as sensor and satellite imagery technology improved, some areas marked on 2001 maps were re-examined using high-resolution images. However, with over a decade past and terrain constantly changing with freeze-thaw cycles, these images yielded no new data. There were no signs of a permanently buried vehicle or objects exposed under ice in an identifiable way. From 2010 to 2018, the cold case unit maintained periodic reviews, but the Nolan case received no information sufficient to trigger reinvestigation. A few investigators expressed skepticism about the possibility that the family's vehicle was outside the original search area, but there was no data to support expanding the search. Reports of criminal violations or other cases in the area were reviewed for matches in names, descriptions, or vehicles, but no files matched the Nolans or family members. The Nolan file was also entered into the National Missing Persons Database, but over 17 years, the system recorded no identification similarities. At certain points, state investigators received information about unidentified bodies found in farther northern or western Alaska areas, but all DNA samples did not match the Nolan file. By late 2018, the Nolan file remained inactive, with no progress and no new data added. All periodic reviews reached the same conclusion: the file lacked traces for expansion, witnesses for cross-referencing, and new information for analysis. Public tips continued to be recorded, but all were dismissed after verification. The 17-year cold case phase of the Nolan disappearance proceeded in complete data deadlock, as every review, matching, and cross-referencing effort failed to open any new investigative directions. During the extended cold case phase of the Nolan file, most years produced no new information, except for one notable report in 2009 regarding a cabin at Johnson Pass. This was an area previously searched in 2001, but due to the vast terrain and numerous scattered cabins, checks at that time focused primarily on the most accessible ones. The 2009 report came from a local resident who frequently hiked the area and stated that a smaller cabin deeper in the forest showed unusual signs compared to previous years. The person noted that the cabin was rarely used, but recently appeared to have had its door opened or some outdoor items moved. Since the report directly related to an area checked in the Nolan case, the cold case unit dispatched a team of troopers to verify. Upon arrival, the team observed that the front door was not fully locked, with hinges slightly misaligned, but no signs of forced entry or major damage. Around the cabin, thin snow near the porch had some sunken areas, but not clear enough to determine when they were made. Troopers noted that outdoor items were shifted from their usual positions, but there were no signs of struggle or vandalism. Inside, the wooden floor and simple furnishings indicated infrequent use, but not complete abandonment. Items like dry firewood, tin cans, and old blankets were stacked near the east window. However, there were no indications that these items were connected to the Nolan family disappearance. The investigation team recorded that the cabin appeared to have been visited recently, but there was insufficient data to identify by whom or when. Since the cabin was in deep forest and often used by hikers as a temporary stop, visits by outsiders were normal. Nevertheless, troopers conducted a full cabin sweep per cold case procedures. They checked dust, wooden floors, the stove, and potential trace areas. There were no personal items, documents, children's belongings, or signs of activity consistent with a family of 4. The team collected samples from the floor and walls for submission to the state forensic unit in hopes of finding biological traces or contact evidence. However, 2009 forensic analysis was limited by technology and environmental sample processing capabilities. The collected samples showed old, unclear biological traces that could not be compared to the Nolan family DNA profiles. Fabric fibers and organic debris from the floor also lacked identifying characteristics, mostly assessed as environmental contaminants. The stove had no fresh ash, indicating no use close to the report time. Checking the surrounding area also provided no valuable data. There were no tire tracks, drag marks, or slide marks at accessible points, and no clear footprints to determine movement direction. Thin, wind-blown snow made surface signs unanalyzable by forensic standards. Troopers concluded that although the cabin showed signs of a recent visit, there was no evidence linking it to the Nolan family disappearance. The cabin was recorded in the file as a verified point, not warranting case reopening in 2009. After documentation, the cabin was secured, and the information was added to the cold case file, marking one of the rare field activities in the 2002-2018 period that yielded no new leads. By 2019, after the Nolan case had remained a cold case for nearly 2 decades, with no new leads emerging, the Alaska State Troopers launched a program to review long unsolved missing persons cases in order to identify those that could benefit from new analytical technologies or required re-evaluation due to unresolved indicators in the original investigative files. During this review, the Nolan file was selected for priority grouping, and the case was assigned to Detective Evan Brooks, an investigator with extensive experience handling complex missing persons cases in Alaska, where harsh natural conditions often obscure evidence and cause investigations to drag on for years. Upon receiving the file, Brooks thoroughly read all the documents from start to finish, including the 2001 search reports, the Johnson Pass cabin logs, helicopter radar data, search grid maps, the 2001 technical report, the 2009 forensic report, and all cold case summaries for the period 2002-2018. Brooks's initial goal was to determine whether the file contained any internal inconsistencies regarding timeline, route, or vehicle description, factors often overlooked when severe weather forced investigators to prioritize field searches over detailed background information analysis. While reviewing the original timeline, Brooks noticed that the interval between the time Eric left the Arctic Sun Roadhouse and the 1:45 a.m. payphone call appeared compressed too tightly. According to initial records, the Roadhouse staff could only confirm Eric's payment time approximately, with no camera footage to support it, meaning the departure time was estimated rather than precisely established. Brooks noted this as a potential inconsistency. He then compared the possible route the Blazer could have taken from Kenai to Quartz Creek under heavy snow, high winds, and low visibility. Experts in 2001 had concluded the timing was feasible, but Brooks identified a noteworthy detail. The shortest route was not always the most viable in a blizzard, and the family might have chosen a nearby alternate route near Cooper Landing if winds on the main road were too severe. However, in the search reports, this area was checked relatively late, and the nothing found conclusion was based on the absence of physical traces. Brooks noted that the conclusion was not wrong, but insufficient to completely rule out this route, as snow could have erased traces before search teams arrived, especially if more than 8 hours had elapsed between the vehicle's passage and the team's arrival. When examining vehicle descriptions in 2001 witness reports, Brooks observed that several statements were dismissed because descriptions of a dark green SUV were deemed insufficiently specific. However, under nighttime lighting and blizzard conditions, distinguishing between dark green and the dark gray of another vehicle would be very difficult. One of the dismissed reports involved a dark-colored SUV turning onto a side road in the Sterling Mile 48 area. This report was excluded because the witness could not confirm it was Nolan's Blazer. Brooks added this detail to the list for re-evaluation because the location lay between 2 search points but had not been analyzed in terms of a possible deviation from the predicted route. Comparing the 2001 cabin logs with the 2009 cabin report, Brooks realized that the cabin reported in 2009 was offset from the cluster checked in 2001. This was not an error but indicated that in 2001, efforts focused on easily accessible cabins, overlooking some deeper in remote areas. Although the 2009 forensic report yielded no results, Brooks flagged that cabin for further analysis because its location coincided with an area where a helicopter had noted an unusual snow depression in the 2001 report. While reviewing data related to the strange man at the Roadhouse, Brooks noted that the description of this individual was very vague. In 2001, there were no procedures for quickly creating composite sketches from witness memory as exist today, and no cameras. Brooks recognized that relying solely on height, dark jacket, and knit cap was insufficient for identification, but the detail that the man walked straight out to the parking lot toward a silver pickup had not been deeply analyzed. Several citizen reports of a similar silver pickup appearing on side roads near Johnson Pass were also not linked to this man's presence. Brooks flagged this as a logical gap in analyzing the subject's route. Additionally, in the 2001 search reports, several snow depression areas marked by helicopter were later deemed unrelated based solely on surface observation. Brooks noted that at the time, sub-snow probing technology was limited, and visual assessment from a low-flying helicopter could not fully rule out the possibility of impact from a heavy object buried under deep snow. He categorized these points as technical inconsistencies due to 2001 limitations. After completing the file review over several weeks, Brooks compiled a list of inconsistencies or inadequately analyzed elements: inaccuracy in the roadhouse departure time, uncertainty about the route the family chose in blizzard conditions, potential vehicle misidentification in witness reports, cabins outside the 2001 search scope but near helicopter-flagged suspicious areas, and limited evaluation of snow depressions. These inconsistencies did not immediately point to a new investigative direction, but revealed numerous gaps in the file that warranted re-examination using modern technology and analytical methods. Brooks concluded that the Nolan file was not fully closed and could be reopened by systematically addressing all inconsistencies, cross-referencing every segment of timeline data, vehicle descriptions, and route to identify any overlooked possibilities from 2001. After Detective Evan Brooks thoroughly reviewed the old file and cataloged potential inconsistencies in the 2001 data, the first development capable of altering the entire investigative trajectory occurred in early summer 2019, when an unusual thaw in the Turnagain Pass area weakened long-frozen permafrost and exposed soil ice layers previously inaccessible. This phenomenon followed a series of days with temperatures higher than average, causing the perennial frozen ground on the western slopes of the pass to contract and subside locally. A road maintenance crew, while inspecting road surface conditions and landslide-prone spots, discovered a large metal object protruding from the thawing permafrost ground several hundred meters from the roadway in a sloped and tree-obscured location during winter. Upon closer approach, they recognized the object as a heavily oxidized vehicle frame with the outer body almost completely deformed. Realizing this could be a vehicle long buried under deep ice, the workers immediately notified the Alaska State Troopers. The information reached the Coordination Center and was forwarded directly to Detective Brooks because the discovery location fell within a potential travel corridor he had flagged in his 2001 route inconsistency list. Brooks and a rapid response team arrived at the scene, equipped with positioning devices, light excavation tools, and initial field analysis kits. From a distance, he already recognized this was not an ordinary metal object. The frame structure, axle positions, and wheelbase matched mid-size SUVs produced in the early 1990s. As the team approached closer, they confirmed the remaining stamped VIN on the rear frame rail, despite corrosion, partially matched the registration numbers of the Chevy Blazer belonging to the Nolan family. The frame's appearance in Turnagain Pass drew particular attention because this area was not within the 2001 search perimeter. According to records, ground searches at the time focused on the main road, trails, cabins, and areas around Quartz Creek, but Turnagain Pass, though near a possible travel route, was excluded from field searches as deemed too far given the payphone call, timing, and because no 2001 evidence suggested the Blazer turned in that direction. Brooks realized the frame's location was in a small valley, completely covered by avalanche snow in winter, creating a thick ice layer capable of burying an object for years without surface signs. When unusual heat waves in summer 2019 caused permafrost contraction, the deeply buried object was partially pushed to the surface. The scene was quickly marked, secured, and zoned to prevent disturbance before the troopers' forensic team arrived. Brooks observed the positional structure and noted the vehicle was tilted to one side, wedged between two low rock clusters, with the front facing slightly downhill. This suggested the vehicle may have left the main road in a brush-obscured section, plunged down the slope, and become lodged here. Thick winter ice accumulation could have kept the vehicle stable for years without further movement. Around the frame, the field team found numerous detached metal fragments, shattered windshield glass, and deformed plastic pieces. However, most of the interior had decomposed or structurally altered due to prolonged burial in permafrost. Notably, this location was outside all areas marked on the 2001 search maps, as the vehicle's plausible direction at the time did not include turning onto a minor route leading toward Turnagain Pass. Brooks recorded this detail as key validation of the route inconsistencies he had assessed. The possibility that the Nolan family chose an unanticipated direction could not be ruled out. As the forensic team conducted a more detailed survey around the vehicle, they noted the soil ice layer broken into large chunks due to rapid thawing. This complicated scene preservation but allowed relative positioning of vehicle fragments to be recorded. The frame was determined to have lain horizontally here for a long period, as underlying ice showed stable long-term crack patterns. Some small fragments deeper in remaining ice required light drilling to extract. Initial analysis confirmed these were remains of the missing Blazer. No intact tires were found, only steel rims, as rubber had fully decomposed or deformed. In the interior, the search team discovered some remaining fabric materials compressed within the frame, but origins could not be determined on site. There were no clear signs of documents, personal items, or identifiable objects, as all had decomposed or been displaced by ice movement. A key factor Brooks noted at the scene was the vehicle's tilt angle and fall direction. Observations suggested the Blazer did not fall straight from the main road, but likely traveled onto a smaller road or steeper slope leading to the valley. However, determining the exact path required further analysis due to ice-altered terrain over the years. After fully documenting the scene, Brooks requested excavation and frame extraction follow cold case standards, including preserving detached parts for later analysis. The slope was further surveyed for any metal traces or debris that might help determine the initial fall path. Though most organic material had decomposed, the scene clearly indicated the Blazer had been deeply buried in permafrost for years, explaining why no 2001-2002 searches detected it. Upon completing the initial survey, Brooks prepared the scene report, marked the location with GPS, zoned the entire vicinity, and issued a preliminary assessment that this discovery opened an entirely new scene, never accessed in 2001. The vehicle was confirmed outside the original search area in an ice-covered deep valley, and the 2019 thaw was the sole reason the frame surfaced after nearly 2 decades. This was the most valuable field evidence since the Nolan family disappeared, and Brooks requested full new cold case scene examination procedures to collect all possible information for subsequent analysis. After the Blazer vehicle frame was extracted from its permafrost location at Turnagain Pass and transported to the examination facility, Detective Evan Brooks coordinated with the forensics unit of the Alaska State Crime Lab to begin the detailed analysis phase of all remaining traces. Although the vehicle had spent nearly 2 decades buried in ice, certain metal structures and interior frame components still retained the ability to preserve biological material or microscopic traces, particularly in metal crevices, skin contact areas, seats, and oxygen-restricted spots. Brooks requested that the forensics team collect DNA using microtrace protocols, employing techniques to extract samples from remaining fabric fibers, seat padding, and contact metal surfaces. Due to the severe decomposition of the interior, the team had to use detailed scrubbing methods, separating material layers and filtering to avoid environmental contamination. The collected samples underwent modern extraction processes utilizing degraded DNA signal amplification techniques, methods not available in 2001. After weeks of analysis, the lab confirmed the recovery of 4 fragmented DNA profiles, sufficient for matching against the Nolan family DNA records stored in the National Missing Persons Database. The results matched each family member: Eric, Dana, Josh, and Emily Nolan. This discovery confirmed that the recovered Blazer was indeed the vehicle the family used when they disappeared, and that they had been inside the vehicle near the time of the incident. However, among the DNA samples recovered, there was a fifth DNA sequence not belonging to any Nolan family member. This sequence was clearer than the Nolan samples because it was preserved in a sheltered metal location with less environmental exposure. When compared through CODIS and supplemental databases, the forensics team noted a match with the DNA profile of an individual named Matthew Kruger, who had been recorded for a minor offense in Seward in 1998. Brooks logged this result into the case file because it shattered the entire prior assumption that the vehicle contained only the Nolan family and no outsiders. Since Kruger had no recorded connection to the Nolan family, the presence of his DNA raised critical questions. When had Kruger been in the vehicle? And under what circumstances? The forensics team continued expanding the analysis to trace evidence, microscopic traces, including fibers, soil particles, minerals, and foreign materials. From crevices under the floor mats, inside door grooves, and bolt retention holes, the team extracted multiple compacted soil samples. Brooks requested mineral composition analysis to determine geographic origin. The soil composition results showed that some samples had the mineral structure characteristic of the Turnagain Pass area, expected since the vehicle was found there, but more notably, another group of samples exhibited mineral signatures, matching soil collected at Johnson Pass during the 2001 cabin inspection and area searches in geological maps. The Johnson Pass mineral composition featured a distinctive magnetite quartz-feldspar ratio created by ancient glacial flows in the region. The soil samples from the vehicle frame, though degraded and altered, still retained this characteristic. This result indicated that the Blazer had stopped at Johnson Pass at some point before being buried at Turnagain Pass. This was entirely new data in the investigation, as in 2001 no one knew the vehicle had left the Quartz Creek area. In addition to soil analysis, forensics identified friction marks on the passenger side door bar where the stranger's DNA was found. The friction pattern was inconsistent with a simple accident and more likely indicated repeated short-term contact, such as someone pulling or holding the door from outside. There were no clear signs of violence, but the traces did not align with the vehicle having only the 4 family members. Brooks requested microscopic material examination using Raman spectroscopy. The results revealed the presence of a synthetic resin commonly found in cheap work gloves, not the type the Nolan family used. The trace evidence once again reinforced the existence of a fifth person. During the analysis, forensics also discovered a small dark gray fabric fragment wedged in the rear door hinge. Though no longer intact, fiber matching showed that this fabric was consistent with canvas work coats commonly used in the Seward area and near informal labor camps, a type of clothing Kruger had worn in his 1998 offense record. This result was not absolute confirmation, but created an indirect link between Kruger and the vehicle. More importantly, the combination of DNA and trace evidence proved that the vehicle did not travel straight from Kenai to Turnagain Pass, but had a stop at Johnson Pass, and at least one stranger had been in the vehicle. When compiling the forensics results, Brooks noted 3 key conclusions. The recovered Blazer was definitively the Nolan family's vehicle. There was DNA presence from a stranger named Matthew Kruger inside the vehicle, and soil analysis proved the vehicle had stopped at Johnson Pass, completely deviating from the 2001 predicted route. These findings rendered the initial assumptions about the route, cause of disappearance, and possibility of a natural accident no longer valid. Brooks prepared a comprehensive forensics report, marking this as the first turning point since the case became a cold case, opening an entirely new analytical scene and raising major questions about Kruger's role in the Nolan family's final journey. After the forensics results confirmed Matthew Kruger's DNA presence in the Blazer and established that the vehicle had stopped at Johnson Pass, Detective Evan Brooks shifted the investigation focus to tracing Kruger's background, behavior, and movement patterns in 2001, to determine whether he was in the area at the time of the Nolan family's disappearance. Brooks began by pulling all civil, criminal, traffic violation, and offense records related to Kruger from 1995-2010. The records showed Kruger was born in Anchorage, had held various seasonal jobs, primarily in mechanical repair shops, small construction sites, and according to statements, short-term labor groups in Seward, Cooper Landing, and areas along the Sterling Highway. In 1998, he was recorded for a minor disturbance in Seward, the incident that provided police with his DNA profile, leading to the forensics match. Brooks searched tax and payroll data, but since Kruger often worked seasonally and was paid under verbal contracts, official records were sparse. However, he discovered a 2001 tool claim document from a small business near Moose Pass that had hired seasonal laborers to repair a warehouse from January to March 2001. The worker list was incomplete, but included a name matching Kruger's surname, though without an identifying number for absolute verification. Brooks contacted the now-retired business owner, who vaguely remembered a young man named Matt, who worked a few weeks then left suddenly, saying he found something else near Sterling Highway. The information was not enough to confirm Kruger's presence definitively, but opened the possibility that he was moving in the area at the time of the Nolan disappearance. Brooks continued reviewing lodging and rental data at motels along the Sterling Highway. Electronic storage from 2001 was incomplete, but some facilities still retained handwritten logs. In the log of a motel in Cooper Landing, Brooks found the signature M. Kruger appearing twice in February and March 2001, close to the disappearance time frame. No ID was attached, but the signature style showed similarities to Kruger's 1998 violation record. Brooks submitted the two signatures for handwriting comparison analysis. The results did not reach absolute confirmation, but indicated high similarity, sufficient to note that Kruger likely passed through the area during the relevant period. Expanding the movement check, Brooks investigated seasonal work sites along the Sterling Highway in early 2001. Some informal labor camps, mostly run by subcontractors in road construction or timber processing, kept incomplete records, but one camp owner at Mile 45 remembered a young mechanic, quiet, worked a few days then left. The person did not recall the name, but the description matched Kruger's photo from the 1998 record. Additionally, the owner noted in a personal log that the young man said he needed to head toward Johnson Pass urgently, though the reason was unclear. This detail caught Brooks's attention because it aligned with the soil analysis showing the Blazer had been at Johnson Pass. Brooks continued checking records of vehicles Kruger owned. According to DMV records, Kruger registered an old silver pickup in 1996, sold in 2002. This pickup matched the description from a witness at Arctic Sun Roadhouse in 2001 of the vehicle the strange man approached after leaving the table, where he spoke with Eric Nolan. Though not enough to confirm it was Kruger, Brooks added this match to the deep analysis data group. Brooks also queried employment records from businesses around Seward and Girdwood to determine if Kruger had specific work schedules on the day the Nolans disappeared. One time sheet from a small repair shop in Seward recorded Kruger absent for 2 consecutive days during the exact period the Nolans vanished, with no reason noted. Brooks viewed this as an additional piece, suggesting Kruger had freedom of movement in the area at that time. Beyond employment data, Brooks analyzed behavioral data. The 1998 violation record described Kruger as prone to losing control, impulsive reactions, frequently quitting jobs midway, and lacking stable relationships. Some former co-workers described Kruger as often hitchhiking, sleeping temporarily in cabins or work sheds, and using forest shortcuts or trails for travel. This description led Brooks to connect it to the 2009 Johnson Pass cabin clue, where signs of use were found but identity undetermined. Compiling all data, Brooks concluded that Kruger was not only present along the Sterling Highway, Johnson Pass, Turnagain Pass area during the suspect time frame, but also likely moved through multiple points without official records. This fit his pattern of seasonal work, flexible movement, and lack of ties. The behavioral data combined with the DNA match in the vehicle and soil analysis, proving the route deviation placed Kruger at the center of the case analysis for the first time since the incident. What was still missing, according to Brooks, was determining when and under what circumstances Kruger encountered the Nolan family. After establishing that Kruger likely moved through the Sterling Highway, Johnson Pass, Turnagain Pass area at the time of the Nolan family's disappearance, Detective Evan Brooks realized the next step was to reconstruct Kruger's movement timeline using any remaining accessible technical data. Although cell tower data storage in 2001 was not as comprehensive as in later years, Brooks knew some carriers retained raw log records from southern Alaska base stations for technical reconciliation. He submitted formal requests to the carrier listed for Kruger's phone number in the 1998 record to search for any surviving data in technical archives. After weeks of processing, the carrier's archive department confirmed they still had partial hanging ping logs from early 2001, including error records, roaming signals, and automatic pings from older CDMA devices. These were not complete records, but data from times of system issues or high load. However, with proper cross-referencing, they could create a relative time frame. Brooks requested the Signal Analysis Department extract all records containing the device identifier matching Kruger's 2001 registration. After filtering, they obtained 8 scattered location pings over about 2 days around the Nolan disappearance time. Each ping had low accuracy, only circling by tower radius, but enough to outline several appearance points. The first ping appeared just before midnight in the Girdwood area, on the southern connector route. The second appeared about 40 minutes later, from a tower between mile 38 and mile 46 on the Sterling Highway, an area that could lead to side roads toward Johnson Pass. When Brooks plotted these on a map, he noted the movement path matched the labor camp owner's account of Kruger leaving work to head toward Johnson Pass. The third ping appeared minutes before 1 a.m. from a tower covering Quartz Creek. This made Brooks pause, as it was the area where Eric Nolan made his payphone call at 1:45 a.m., though the ping did not pinpoint the device exactly. Its appearance in the same tower coverage at that time significantly increased the likelihood that Kruger and Nolan were in the same area, at least the same radius. Brooks continued analyzing the gap between the mile 46 ping and the Quartz Creek ping. The physical distance indicated southward movement, and the time between pings fit vehicle speeds on snowy roads. The fourth ping appeared around 2 a.m. from a tower near the Old Side turnoff to Johnson Pass, where soil analysis confirmed the blazer stopped. This created a logical chain: Kruger's device at mile 46, near Quartz Creek, then near Johnson Pass, in the exact order the forensic soil suggested. Brooks noted this alignment as a key data point. The fifth and sixth pings were sparse near dawn, from towers in the Turnagain Arm area. Though not extremely close to the 2019 vehicle find site, they confirmed northward movement, consistent with leaving Johnson Pass, then passing Turnagain Pass. The seventh ping was the most critical. It appeared at 3:12 a.m. from the sole tower covering the western slope of Turnagain Pass, the area adjacent to where the blazer was found. Thus, the sequence: mile 46 ping, Quartz Creek ping, Johnson Pass ping, Turnagain Pass ping, all aligned with the route reconstructed from mineral samples. The eighth ping in the morning showed reconnection in Girdwood, as if returning to a living area or frequent spot for Kruger. This was not enough to conclude Kruger's exact route, but reinforced the nighttime appearances. Cross-referencing the ping timeline with the Nolan families, Brooks marked 3 key points. 1. Eric leaving Arctic Sun Roadhouse. 2. Eric's payphone call from Quartz Creek. 3. Blazer at Johnson Pass per soil analysis. All 3 fell within Kruger's device ping ranges. Brooks created a comparison table. If Kruger's ping appeared near Quartz Creek around Eric's call time, the chance of contact, or at least proximity, was very high. More importantly, the gap between the third and fourth pings perfectly matched the natural time for a vehicle to travel from the payphone to the soil-confirmed area. Combining all data, Brooks built a temporary timeline model. Kruger's device moved along the exact route the blazer took, with ping times overlapping the Nolan family's disappearance night milestones. No pings showed Kruger's device leaving the area before the blazer deviated from the main road. This led Brooks to a preliminary conclusion that Kruger was not merely in the area, but likely traveled with or parallel to the Nolan vehicle. And the overlaps in time, route, locations were too strong to be coincidental. This was the first time since 2001 that technical timeline data created a strong enough framework to establish a connection between Kruger and the Nolan family's final journey. After successfully reconstructing the timeline using 2001 cell tower data and determining that Kruger's device route matched 3 key points in the Nolan family's journey, particularly the consecutive appearances at Quartz Creek, Johnson Pass, and Turnagain Pass, Detective Evan Brooks decided to return to the suspicious location mentioned in the 2009 file, the cabin at Johnson Pass. This was the cabin that in 2009 had been reported to show unusual signs, but forensics at the time lacked the capability to analyze trace evidence. Now, combining soil analysis, stranger DNA in the blazer, and the cell tower timeline made the cabin the central focus for re-examination using 2019 technology. Brooks mobilized a crime scene team equipped with modern tools, including laser scanning systems, next-generation luminol, micro-trace DNA collectors, and decomposed protein analyzers. Upon arriving at the cabin, the team first noted that the structure remained similar to 2009 old door, aged wooden floor, unused stove. However, Brooks paid special attention to the rear door hinge, the same spot noted in the old report as showing displacement, but with no clear cause. The forensics team scanned the entire floor with shortwave UV lights to detect physical drag marks invisible to the naked eye. Several small indentations appeared in the area near the cabin corner, though covered in dust. These indentations had no immediate conclusive value, but indicated the cabin had activity during an unrecorded period. Next, the team sprayed 2019 generation luminol, capable of reacting to ultratrace hemoglobin that older luminol could not detect. As the blue glow spread across the wooden floor in the left corner of the cabin, a series of reactions appeared as 3 elongated spots trailing toward the rear door, resembling drag marks but very small in size. They had almost completely degraded over time, but the fluorescent pattern matched human blood traces at a micro level. The forensics team collected samples for analysis while continuing to scan along the baseboards, and at the wooden beam behind the stove, luminol reacted again, this time as small streaks in a drip pattern. In 2009, this would have been completely invisible because older luminol could not detect it on oxidized wood. The presence of blood traces in the cabin led Brooks to move to microtrace DNA testing. The microtrace device used electrostatic suction to collect particles in the wood crevices. Near the rear door area, the team recovered 2 extremely small protein fiber particles. Analysis showed the microtrace samples had a keratin structure consistent with human hair, and crucially, the hair shaft diameter was small, belonging to the child group, not adults. Brooks marked this as the most significant discovery from the cabin since 2001. The forensics team expanded the collection area to other wood crevices. In the groove between 2 floorboards in the kitchen area, they recovered a small pale pink fabric fiber. Spectral analysis confirmed the fiber matched the polyester type commonly used in children's sweaters sold in Anchorage in the late 1990s. Although direct comparison with family items was impossible due to no remaining samples, the presence of child fabric alongside child hair in the cabin made it a direct connection, no longer speculation. Additionally, the rear door hinge area was scanned with a 3D laser system for tool marks or pressure fingerprints. The device detected tiny metal slide marks indicating the door had been forced open from the outside. Surface analysis found 2 traces of mechanical grease matching the type previously found in trace amounts in the blazer's interior. This meant the cabin and vehicle may have been contacted by the same material source, strengthening the forensic link between the two scenes. While surveying the area around the cabin, the team found a small rusted metal piece, a few centimeters long, buried under old moss. Analysis identified it as belonging to the rear door handle of the Blazer. Though no longer intact, the steel structure matched the 1993-1995 production line. Finding a vehicle part in the cabin area was the first physical evidence connecting Johnson Pass cabin to the Nolan family's Blazer. Continuing microtrace collection, the team found a very small amount of mineral soil stuck on the cabin door hinge. Mineralogical analysis showed the soil composition matched the distinctive sample from the Blazer's discovery site at Turnagain Pass, proving the cabin had contact with an object or person from Turnagain Pass, a two-way link between the cabin and the vehicle scene. The blood samples detected by luminol were sent to a degraded DNA lab using new sequence recovery techniques. 6 weeks later, results came back. The DNA belonged to one of the two Nolan children, fragmented but sufficient for confirmation. This made the cabin a direct crime scene, no longer a speculative stop. Brooks compiled the findings: micro-blood traces reacting to luminol in the cabin, child hair, child clothing fabric fiber, matching grease traces with the Blazer interior, and a metal part from the vehicle. All appeared in the cabin only after the Nolan family disappearance. This ruled out the possibility of the cabin being a random shelter for strangers and confirmed its direct involvement in the Nolan case. Additionally, combined soil analysis from the cabin and Blazer proved the vehicle had stopped at the cabin before being moved to Turnagain Pass, matching cell tower data and the contradictory route Brooks had noted. The conclusion of the cabin re-examination phase was recorded in the file with the highest certainty. Johnson Pass cabin was the intermediate point where the Nolan family, or at least one member, had been present before the Blazer was moved out of the area. With this discovery, the case shifted from missing without trace to with related crime scene, opening an entirely new investigation direction based on physical evidence emerging for the first time after nearly 2 decades. After the 2019 Johnson Pass cabin examination results confirmed the presence of blood and child hair belonging to the Nolan family, along with a Blazer component and grease traces matching the vehicle's interior, Detective Evan Brooks moved the file to the action phase. With the cabin confirmed as a direct scene and Kruger's DNA in the Blazer, plus cell tower route showing him at 3 key points on the disappearance night, Brooks immediately requested a surveillance warrant for the subject in Anchorage. Kruger was then living a disjointed life, no steady job, frequently moving between Anchorage, Eagle River, and Girdwood. Troopers deployed long-range surveillance, observing whether Kruger showed any behavior related to the cabin, forest, or points along the Sterling Highway. Over 2 weeks of monitoring, Brooks noted Kruger often carried an old backpack containing basic items like rope, folding knife, small hammer, and duct tape. Not illegal, but matching the type of tools noted in many outdoor assaults. Kruger lived in a short-term rental room in suburban Anchorage. Brooks organized multi-angle observation, compiling Kruger's schedule. The subject often left home late at night, driving an old silver pickup, matching the witness description at the Roadhouse in 2001. Based on accumulated evidence and cabin forensics analysis, Brooks submitted the file for an arrest warrant. The warrant was quickly issued on suspicion related to the 2001 Nolan family disappearance. Troopers coordinated with a special task force to arrest Kruger at 6 a.m. as he was leaving his residence to drive south. The arrest went smoothly. Kruger did not resist but appeared confused and tried to conceal the backpack he always carried. After cuffing and reading his rights, troopers seized the backpack and conducted a quick search. Inside, besides the folding knife and hammer, they found a small pink fabric scrap matching the shade of the fiber recovered from Johnson Pass cabin. Additionally, there was a roll of construction duct tape with a few hairs stuck to the edge. The items were sealed and sent to forensics. Searching the pickup, troopers found under the passenger seat a pair of dark rubber gloves matching the resin material previously found in trace amounts in the blazer. In the truck bed, they found an old machinery oil can with exterior dust matching Turnagain Pass soil. All items were seized per evidence protocol. Kruger's arrest marked the first time since the case began that troopers held a direct suspect based on 3 layers of evidence: DNA in the blazer cabin scene with Nolan family biological traces, and trace evidence linking cabin, vehicle, Kruger. After completing the arrest, Brooks prepared for the interrogation phase. Immediately after Kruger's arrest and the seized items were handed over to forensics, Detective Evan Brooks prepared for the first interrogation session. The goal of this session was not to directly accuse, but to gauge Kruger's initial reactions, collect his explanations for his DNA in the blazer, and assess his awareness of Johnson Pass cabin. In the interrogation room, Kruger initially maintained a calm demeanor, trying to appear cooperative. When Brooks asked if he knew the Nolan family, Kruger denied it immediately, saying he had never met them and knew nothing about the 2001 disappearance. Brooks continued by asking if he had ever been in the Sterling Highway area during that time. Kruger replied that in 2001, he only worked around Seward and rarely went farther. Brooks noted the response, but did not react, sticking to point-by-point confrontation. When asked about his DNA appearing in the Nolan family's blazer, Kruger said it could be a lab mix-up or someone else with a similar name. A response Brooks immediately flagged because the forensic profile was an absolute match based on 1998 DNA, with no possibility of error. Kruger showed confusion but held his stance that he had never been in that vehicle. Brooks let him speak, then shifted to asking about Johnson Pass cabin. He said he did not recall ever going to any cabin there, only knowing that area has many small abandoned cabins. However, when Brooks asked if he had ever used that cabin as shelter in the past, Kruger denied it strongly, saying he never stepped into abandoned cabins. This statement immediately contradicted witness data Brooks had on Kruger's habit of sleeping in cabins, but Brooks only noted it without rebutting. After nearly 20 minutes gathering basic information, Brooks began confronting statements with the forensic timeline. He asked about the evening of February 9, 2001, the disappearance night. Kruger claimed that around that time he was in Seward and did not leave town. Brooks quietly pulled the cell tower ping file, but did not show it yet, and asked, "Are you sure you were never near Quartz Creek late that night?" Kruger affirmed he was certain not. Brooks continued, "Did you ever drive to mile 46 on the Sterling Highway that night?" Kruger shook his head, saying, "I don't remember ever going there." Brooks paused in silence for a few seconds, then shifted to Johnson Pass. "Can you explain why your device pinged at Johnson Pass around 2 a.m.? At this point, Kruger's expression changed. He asked how police got that data, then claimed his phone must have been used by someone else. However, Brooks had verified the 2001 CDMA device could only ping if powered on and registered by its owner. No one else could use it. Brooks did not conclude, just continued noting reactions. The first major contradiction emerged when Kruger claimed his 2001 pickup was not running and in for repairs, while the labor camp witness at mile 45 said Kruger left the camp driving toward Johnson Pass. Moreover, the 2001 Roadhouse employee's description of a man going to a silver pickup matched Kruger's vehicle at the time. When Brooks asked about this truck, Kruger said he rarely drove it at night, but provided no convincing details. Brooks continued confronting, "You said you didn't leave Seward, but carrier data shows your device at Quartz Creek during the time overlapping Eric Nolan's call." Kruger immediately became flustered, changing his statement to "maybe I passed through there but don't remember." This directly contradicted his prior claim of not leaving Seward. Brooks noted the contradiction pattern, complete denial confronted with data-altered statement. When Brooks asked about Johnson Pass cabin, "Are you certain you've never been inside?" and mentioned the forensic grease traces matching the substance in his current vehicle, Kruger again changed his story to, "Maybe I went in there once when lost." Brooks flagged this as the second major contradiction, initial absolute denial of entering cabins, then admitting, maybe after hearing forensic data. Next, Brooks asked, "Can you explain why the cabin has child blood traces and hair belonging to the Nolan family?" Kruger appeared panicked, saying he didn't know and never saw any children there. However, his reaction shifting from denial to defensiveness led Brooks to realize he was trying to distance himself from the scene. The third major contradiction arose when Brooks asked, "If you've never met the Nolan family, how does your DNA appear in their blazer, in the passenger seat position?" Kruger said, "Police are setting me up," a response that explained nothing about the absolute DNA match. The first interrogation ended with three critical contradictions, one denying leaving Seward, but cell tower data proving otherwise. 2 denying entering the cabin but later admitting, maybe. 3 denying knowing the Nolan family, but unable to explain his DNA in their vehicle. Brooks concluded that Kruger's statements were inconsistent and completely contrary to the forensic timeline, providing a solid basis for further investigation steps. After the first interrogation full of contradictions and unstable reactions from Kruger, Detective Evan Brooks decided to deploy the second interrogation tactic based on the 3 weaknesses just established: cell tower timeline, DNA in the blazer, and Johnson Pass cabin traces. Brooks entered the room for the second session calm but firm, placing in front of Kruger a printed photo of the cabin with glowing luminol marks and a compiled route map from ping locations. Without direct accusation, he simply said, "We've traced the entire route that night." Kruger remained silent, but his tense expression showed he understood there was little room left for denial. Brooks began by isolating each contradiction. "You said you've never been in the cabin, but forensics recovered child hair and blood belonging to the Nolan family." Kruger lowered his head. Brooks continued, "You said you didn't leave Seward, but your device pinged at exactly the 3 points matching the blazer's path." Kruger breathed heavily, hands clenching. When Brooks asked the final question, "If you've never met the Nolan family, why does your DNA appear in their vehicle?" Kruger did not answer and avoided Brooks' gaze. In that moment, Brooks realized Kruger's defensive wall was starting to crack. After several minutes of silence, Kruger said quietly, "I didn't do it alone." Brooks did not react, letting him continue. Kruger said, "He just wanted to take the vehicle and didn't intend to hurt anyone." But the situation escalated beyond control. He confessed that on that evening he met Eric at the roadhouse and approached with the excuse of needing a ride a short way. Kruger said Eric initially refused, but when Kruger followed him to the parking lot, an exchange occurred that he did not describe in detail. He said he only remembered Eric being uneasy and in a hurry before leaving the place. When Brooks asked about the payphone call, Kruger admitted he was standing nearby and waiting for a chance to take the vehicle. When Nolan left the payphone, according to Kruger, tension arose, leading to him pushing hard once, causing Eric to fall. Brooks noted this detail, but did not react, only asking further, "So where was the family during that?" Kruger said Dana and the 2 children were still sitting in the vehicle. When Brooks asked if he knew Johnson Pass cabin, Kruger sighed and said, "Yes, I took them there." At this point, his statement shifted from denial to detailed description, showing progressing psychological collapse. Kruger confessed that after the blazer left Quartz Creek, he directed the vehicle onto a side path near mile 46, heading to Johnson Pass. He described the faint road in the dark, thick snow, causing the vehicle to slide lightly a few times. He said the cabin was chosen because no one came there in winter. When Brooks asked what happened inside the cabin, Kruger hesitated, then said, "I just wanted them to stay still, not resist." This did not explain details, but matched the cabin luminol traces. Brooks moved to the core question, "Where did you take them after the cabin?" Kruger looked down at the table, hands trembling slightly. After a few seconds, he said the words Brooks had been waiting for, "I'll show the location." He confessed that after leaving the cabin, he moved along a sloping path parallel to an old trail, heading deep into Johnson Pass forest. Kruger described dragging small objects over thin snow and said the hard ice helped him move easily. He described details. At an open forest spot near a small creek, he dug a shallow hole using a wooden shovel found in the cabin. When Brooks asked how many objects he buried, Kruger was silent before saying, "All of them." Kruger continued describing the site: a fallen tree pointing east, 2 trunks crossed like an X, and a low mound before reaching the creek edge. These were natural markers verifiable on the ground. Brooks asked him to describe the distance from the cabin. Kruger said about 1/3 of a mile on foot, but admitted he didn't count. When asked for the exact movement direction, Kruger said from the cabin rear door, "Turn left through a cluster of firs leading down the ravine." Kruger also described concealment. After burying, he covered with snow, then dragged dry branches over the ground to obscure traces. According to him, heavy snow started falling a few hours later, covering everything clean. When Brooks asked why he chose Turnagain Pass to abandon the vehicle, Kruger said, "The Blazer got stuck and could not be driven farther." He confessed he tried pushing the vehicle down an icy slope to hide everything before leaving the area. This perfectly matched the discovered vehicle frame buried in permafrost. When Brooks asked one last time, was anyone else involved, Kruger shook his head, saying it was all him. The interrogation ended with Kruger agreeing to lead troopers to the forest location he described. Brooks knew this was the first time in 18 years there was a direct confession pointing to the body's location and describing the concealment route. He immediately requested the field team prepare a search deployment based on the information Kruger provided. Immediately after Kruger provided the location where the bodies were buried in the Johnson Pass forest, Detective Evan Brooks immediately mobilized the forensics team, the ground search team, and a GIS unit to precisely locate the area based on the natural landmarks Kruger had described. Since the statement included reference points, such as a fallen tree pointing east, 2 tree trunks crossed like an X, and a low mound of earth before the creek edge, the search team used 3D terrain data combined with LiDAR scans of the area to narrow down the range with matching characteristics. The following morning, under Brooks' direct supervision, troopers led the handcuffed Kruger along the old trail behind the Johnson Pass cabin. Although his memory was no longer perfectly accurate, when they reached a section of sloping forest that opened up, Kruger stopped, pointed toward a cluster of broken trees and said, "There." The forensics team entered the area, established the crime scene perimeter, and began the preliminary survey. The thick moss and decayed layer indicated the area had remained undisturbed for many years, but at the exact spot Kruger indicated, a mound of earth with a differently compacted structure appeared beneath the vegetation layer. The forensic experts used probes and a portable ground-penetrating radar. The return signal showed an unnatural elongated mass at a depth of approximately 40–60 centimeters. This matched Kruger's description that the hole was not deep because of the frozen ground. After photographing the entire surface and mapping the location, the forensics team began removing the vegetation layer according to standard crime scene excavation procedures. At a depth of about 20 centimeters, fragments of decomposed fabric appeared, one piece dark green in color, matching the tone of the winter clothing Dana Nolan was reported to have worn on the night she disappeared. As they continued removing the soil layers, they found a long bone segment smaller than normal, suspected to belong to a child. The forensics team marked the position of each fragment and collected them carefully to avoid disrupting the structure. In the deeper part of the pit, they found an adult pelvic bone along with a heavily decomposed section of jacket, but the thick fabric was still sufficient to identify the stitching pattern similar to Eric Nolan's jacket. Near the edge of the pit, they discovered a small intact metal hair clip, a detail matching the description of Emily Nolan's belongings in the 2001 report. These items of evidence created a consistent match between the scene and the Nolan family's personal identification information. As excavation continued, the forensics team confirmed a total of 4 sets of remains, 1 adult male, 1 adult female, and 2 children. All were found in the same pit, arranged without order, consistent with Kruger's statement that he simply dug a shallow hole and covered it. Beside the remains was a small curved piece of plastic, identified as part of the frame of a mini flashlight, the type Dana usually carried on long trips, according to family statements. Nearby was a steel zipper fragment from a child's jacket, completely matching the type described on the jacket Josh was wearing. All evidence was sealed, numbered, and transported to the laboratory following procedures for preserving long-buried bones. The forensics team used next-generation degraded DNA recovery techniques, extracting from the remaining marrow in the long bone shafts, a method that did not exist in 2001. After 3 weeks of analysis, the laboratory reported the results. All 4 sets of remains matched the DNA profiles of Eric, Dana, Josh, and Emily Nolan. The match rate reached absolute scientific probability. In addition to DNA, bone isotope analysis also showed samples consistent with the family's recorded dietary patterns. Further reinforcing identification consistency, Brooks immediately recorded this result in the investigation report. The remains recovered at Johnson Pass were officially confirmed as the Nolan family, shifting the case from undetermined missing persons to established victims. At the same time, the evidence collected at the scene, hair clip, jacket fragments, flashlight plastic piece, zipper, and decomposed fabric samples, were determined to match descriptions of the family's belongings when they left home. This excavation marked the biggest turning point in the case in nearly 2 decades. The first time the crime scene was reconstructed based on the suspect's statement, while affirming the connection between the Johnson Pass cabin, the forensic travel route, and the burial site. Brooks recorded all this data as a key component of the file before moving to the next prosecution phase. After the DNA identification results and excavated evidence at Johnson Pass confirmed that all 4 sets of remains were indeed the Nolan family, the investigation file was transferred to the prosecution phase with an unprecedented volume of evidence in the case's history. And the trial of Matthew Kruger became the focal point of Alaska's justice system in 2019. The prosecutor handling the case, Linda Harrow, opened with an indictment comprising multiple charges: first-degree murder for all 4 victims, kidnapping, unlawful deprivation of liberty, transportation and concealment of bodies, and destruction of evidence. Harrow presented to the court that the case had been stalled for 18 years, but the combination of modern forensics, new scene excavation, and cell tower timeline had fully reconstructed Kruger's chain of actions on the night the Nolan family disappeared. At trial, the prosecution sequentially introduced each layer of evidence, starting with the forensic timeline, the core element proving Kruger was present at every critical point in the case. Harrow displayed the cell tower ping map, proving Kruger's mobile device moved from Girdwood down the Sterling Highway on the night of the Nolans' disappearance, pinging at mile 46 coinciding with the time the Blazer left the Kenai area, pinging at Quartz Creek, matching the time Eric Nolan called the payphone at 1:45 a.m., and pings at Johnson Pass and Turnagain Pass, aligning perfectly with the route the Blazer was proven to have taken based on soil analysis. The prosecution emphasized, not just coincidentally present, the defendant traveled the exact route the Blazer took without missing a single point. Next, Harrow presented forensic DNA and trace evidence from the Blazer. Kruger's DNA matched perfectly with his 1998 sample, found on the passenger seat, a location with no reason for a stranger's DNA to remain unless there was direct contact. The prosecution described this as an undeniable biological fingerprint. The court requested the lab to present, and experts confirmed the DNA was not environmental cross-contamination, but from close contact. Harrow continued with fabric fibers in the Blazer and Johnson Pass cabin, both bearing resin traces matching the type of gloves recovered from Kruger's pickup truck at arrest. The physical and chemical match of evidence linked the cabin, the vehicle, Kruger in a closed forensic chain with no leaks. Afterward, the prosecution moved to the Johnson Pass cabin, where forensic conclusions indicated direct contact between victims and defendant occurred. Harrow presented luminol photos recording child blood traces on the cabin floor. DNA results confirmed the blood belonged to one of the two Nolan children. Additionally, microtrace techniques recovered child hair and fabric fibers from a child's sweater, matching the family's description before disappearance. On the cabin door hinge, grease traces matched material found in the blazer, proving the cabin was a mandatory stop in the defendant's travel chain. Next, a metal fragment found under the decayed mat near the cabin was identified as part of the blazer's door handle, a piece of evidence so strong that defense counsel could not refute it. Harrow concluded the cabin section, "Not only were the victims present here, the cabin is where the violence occurred. Child blood traces are undeniable proof." Moving to the presentation on the burial site, the prosecution displayed the excavation diagram, scene video, and each recovered item: Eric's decomposed jacket, Dana's clothing fragment, zipper from Josh's jacket, Emily's hair clip, and broken mini flashlight, all confirmed by DNA and personal identification comparison. Harrow emphasized the defendant not only led the way but described the exact location, natural features, and distances, knowledge only possible if he himself committed the act. Kruger's pointing statement was presented in court as recorded audio and transcript, showing he described the route leading victims into the forest, direction from the cabin, mound location, broken tree, and burial sequence. The prosecution said, "Only the perpetrator could describe the body location with such absolute accuracy." Defense counsel attempted to counter by arguing the statement might have been coerced, but the interrogation video showed Kruger voluntarily providing information after being read his rights. The court rejected the coercion claim due to no signs of force, threats, or improper leading. In the indictment summary section, Harrow described Kruger as a lone individual who exploited isolation, blizzard conditions, and Alaska terrain to control a family, transport them overnight to Johnson Pass, then kill and bury them to erase all traces. The prosecution stressed that the hours-long actions, vehicle movement taking 4 victims to a cabin, then burying at another site, constituted clear intent, not accident or impulse. Defense counsel attempted to argue Kruger was mentally unstable and lacked intent to kill, but when cross-referenced with 4 bodies, cabin blood traces, multi-stage transport, and child DNA in the vehicle, the argument was deemed baseless by the court. The prosecution closed with, "He didn't just make one wrong choice, he executed a deliberate chain of actions, leading to the deaths of 4 people." The jury retired for deliberation after 3 hours of review. Upon return, the foreman read the verdict: Kruger guilty of first-degree murder for all 4 victims, along with all additional charges. In the sentencing phase, the prosecution requested the maximum life without parole, based on severity, number of victims, and duration of concealment. Defense requested reconsideration, citing defendant's cooperation by pointing the location, but the court rejected it, as cooperation occurred after evidence was overwhelming. The judge read the final sentence: life imprisonment without parole, no reduction eligibility, no conditions swap. When the sentence was announced, Brooks, seated in the back row, simply noted one short line in his notebook: Nolan case, closed after 18 years. With this verdict, the Nolan file was officially closed, ending one of Alaska's longest missing persons investigation, prosecution cases, bringing the nearly 2-decade journey to a clear and complete justice conclusion. The story of the Nolan family, spanning 18 years and only clarified through the combination of modern forensic technology, the persistent will of investigators, and the ability to re-examine seemingly minor inconsistencies in old files, reflects many social issues that the United States today still faces. The dangers of travel in remote areas, the importance of technical data in criminal investigations, and the need for vigilance toward relationships, people, or situations that seem harmless. The detail of Kruger approaching Eric at an ordinary roadhouse, a place familiar as a stop for Alaskans, shows that criminal contexts are sometimes not dangerous places, but familiar spaces where people easily lower their guard. Similarly, the blazer disappearing simply by turning onto a dark side road in heavy snow reminds us that America's wilderness, though beautiful and vast, still harbors risks that people need to prepare for more thoroughly when traveling. Informing loved ones of itineraries, carrying tracking devices, or avoiding unexpected route changes in bad weather. Another lesson comes from the investigation process itself. Years of deadlock, not due to lack of investigator competence, but lack of data. Only when modern forensics, cell tower data, and soil analysis were applied, did the case unravel. This reflects today's reality in the United States. Technical data, from phone location to traffic cameras, is not just a convenience tool, but sometimes the deciding factor between justice and a case's silence. Finally, the case reminds us that modern American communities still face individuals with dangerous behavior hidden behind normal appearances. Discovering Kruger through the smallest traces, trace DNA, metal fragments, even fabric fibers, is a reminder that every action leaves a mark. And truth, though buried deep for 18 years under Alaska's ice, will eventually surface. The greatest lesson: always prepare thoroughly, remain reasonably vigilant, and trust in the value of persistence and scientific progress. Even the longest mysteries can ultimately be solved. Thank you for joining us on this journey to unravel the Nolan case after 18 years buried in Alaska's icy cold. If you want to continue exploring stories solved through science and perseverance like this, remember to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video, where we'll continue tracing mysteries that seem buried by time, but still wait to be told.